We're joined today by the Controller and Auditor General Seamus McCarthy as a permanent witness to the committee, and is joined by Mark Brady, Deputy Director of Audit. Apologies have been received from Deputy Pat Deering. I propose we postpone the business of the committee and meet directly with the Secretary General of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. And as I think people will be aware, he's here until lunchtime, and he is at the Finance and Public Expenditure Committee in the afternoon. And in the afternoon, we'll have a session probably very early in the afternoon to deal with the routine business of the committee correspondence and to complete the periodic report that has been discussed a couple of times here in private session, and that will be in private session, and the annual report, which will also be launched next week. And the annual report is really a statistical compilation of all the meetings and the witnesses, etc. There are no conclusions or recommendations. It's just a summary of the work. Now, before we begin, there's an issue. We issued an invitation to the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, Robert Watt, and in the letter of invitation, we had specifically asked for Mr Paul Quinn to come along, and also officials from the Department of Health with responsibility for the health vote. So the position is this, and I'm conscious of it. The first reason we asked Paul Quinn to come along was we received a letter from him some time ago in his role of Office of Government Procurement. But he was also a member of the board of the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board. And our interest in Mr Quinn relates to his role specifically on that board. And we've had the board in before and health in before. He wasn't at the previous meeting. We have requested to come in. And as Chairman, I am saying that the appropriate time for Paul Quinn to appear here is when we have the paediatric board here again, because that's what we want to talk to him about, is his role as the director of the paediatric board. And I would probably suggest, I haven't the names here today, I would be inclined to suggest that any other public servant who's on that board should be here that day, because a key element of our work is the interaction between public servants and state bodies and boards to serve on, and lines of communication with the relevant minister. The issue of the Children's Hospital, which is not mainly the issue of today's meeting, is mainly the capital projects. The issue of the Children's Hospital is a matter that we've dealt with before, and we've agreed to come back to again as soon as that report is ready on the cost overruns, and the paediatric board will be back in. And I'm saying that's the meeting we need Mr Quinn at, in his capacity as a director of that board, which I expect he will be here on that day. Now, I'm throwing it over Gomad. It's a valid point. We read out his detailed letter at a previous meeting. Some people may have read it, others may not have read it. His role as a civil servant and his line minister in respect of his role on that board is to the Minister for Health, who appointed him to that board. It is a health function. It's a department. You can all comment, but I'm laying a context out there. It's in relation to he has no role, and that was pointed out in the letter the last day, to the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform in respect of his membership of the Board of Directors. As I understand it, people might disagree with that, and his reporting structure is through health and to the Minister for Health. So, and we said that the last day. Several people have indicated, and we will be proceeding with the meeting. Deputy Cullinane, Deputy MacSharry, Deputy Murphy, and I forget Connolly and whatever. The clerk is trying to jot them down. Deputy Cullinane, and first thing I have to say, I'm most dissatisfied that we have this invitation out here for probably a month now. That we only learned late last night that Mr Quinn wasn't coming here today, and that is a source of annoyance and aggravation. Pardon?
Was that communication from Mr Quinn himself? No,
it's from the Secretary General of the Department. All the communication is through the Accounting Officer, and as is normal, the Accounting Officer decides who he brings with him, as is normal. We've never refused to accept a witness that an Accounting Officer wants to bring, but I would have said there is respect on both sides. If an Accounting Officer brings in witnesses, we respect those witnesses, but we would also expect respect that if we ask for someone specifically, that person come. I've considered this matter, and the appropriate time for Mr Quinn to be here is as a member of the Board of Directors of the Paediatric Board. That's my opening observation. Deputy Cullinane, Deputy MacSharry.
I don't accept that at all, Chair. I think it's very unsatisfactory that Mr Quinn is not here today. The first thing I'll say in response to your own observation is that we need to be careful we don't undermine our own work. And this committee decides who to invite and when to invite them as a committee. We did decide as a committee that we would invite Mr Quinn to attend today with the Secretary-General of the Department. All of the correspondence that was sent to Mr Quinn was in relation to today's meeting.
Mr Watt?
Yes, and Mr Quinn.
Yeah, you said Mr Quinn. The correspondence was to Mr Watt.
Sorry, to Mr Watt, yes, but we had been in correspondence with Mr Quinn as well, but in relation to the invitation, yes, for the meeting, we specifically asked for Mr Quinn. Correct. So that's a matter for this committee. It is not a matter for Mr Watt, and it's not a matter either for the Chair to unilaterally decide when it's best, when it's best for Mr Quinn to appear before the committee. I have no difficulty if he wants to come in on 2 occasions. If the department are back again and the board are back and Mr Quinn wants to come back as a board member, that's fine. But we were looking for him as the head of the Office of Public Procurement and somebody who also sat on the board, so was in quite a unique position. And you said that we only learnt of this last night. We as members of this committee have to prepare for meetings. A lot of the preparation was in relation to the minutes that were related to Mr Quinn's involvement as a board member. Some of them are the joint committees on construction and finance where he's cited, one of them on the 30th of August 2018. We can't put any of these questions to him now, so we prepared for this, and yet now he's not here, and we learn it at the very last minute. We have an opening statement for Mr Watt that runs 18 pages. He doesn't mention the National Children's Hospital once. Now, I accept that wasn't the basis upon which he was brought in. It was a much broader remit, but at the same time, under their own documentation they sent us, the major projects under Project Ireland 2040, the National Children's Hospital is the second one. It's one of the major projects, and yet he doesn't reference it once. And I think that's a clear tactic, to be honest, by the accounting officer and by the Secretary-General. And I'm saying it and I'm putting it on the record now from my own perspective. I think there is an attempt by some at the top of the public service to kick back against the PAC. And we're seeing it more and more, and here's another example of it. And we have to stand our ground as a committee. We do our best. We ask questions without fear or favour. There's a lot of issues, a lot of questions surrounding the spend of the National Children's Hospital, of which there are a number of departments that are involved in terms of oversight, and DEPR is one of them. And the accounting officer for DEPR is accountable to the PEC on these issues, and we have reasonable questions that we want to put. And I just don't want this to be a game that's being played by senior civil servants. He's going to be before the Finance Committee today. There was an attempt to play one committee after the other through the media a number of weeks ago. It's not good enough. It's not a good way for any accounting officer to treat committees of the Oireachtas. And that's my opinion only, in putting that on the record. But again, I'll just finish. Other members want to come in. I'm deeply disappointed that Mr Quinn is not here, because we were under the impression up to last night that was to be the case. We prepared for it, and he should be here, as was invited. And it isn't for Mr Watt to decide who comes alone. He can bring whoever he wants from his department, but if we make a specific request for someone to be here, we would have expected that person to be here, from my perspective.
Deputy MacSharry.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and I agree 100% with my colleague Deputy Cullinane. It's at a stage now where the level of contempt with which the committees generally are being treated is unacceptable. I think the notion of pesky politicians having the effrontery to ask questions in the public interest when it comes to the expenditure of public money on their behalf, and how that's been treated. We did have correspondence from Mr Watt before, or certainly his department, saying that the accounting officer would decide what team he or she would bring with them. Now, I understood that this committee decides who it wants and they come in. Is that not the case? We don't decide.
There's only one person, and just for...
No, I know who the accounting officer is, but if we seek somebody, is it at the discretion of the accounting officer who they bring?
Utterly. Just so people are aware, I want to say this as chairperson. The only person required to appear before a Public Accounts Committee is the accounting officer.
So if we ask for somebody, Chairman, if we beyond that,
I'm going to answer the question.
He's entitled to say no, is he? Yeah?
The answer is, and this is the official position as laid down, not by me, I'm just giving it as it is. The only person answerable to this committee is the accounting officer. Nobody else. An accounting officer is free to come on his own, and every accounting officer, if he or she so chooses. Regularly, they bring officials with them to assist the progress of the meeting. But that's at the behest of the accounting officer. We have no official below accounting officer is obliged to appear at a Public Accounts Committee. No, I'm giving you it straight.
No, it is a very literal.
Yeah,
No, let me finish. I'm trying to put the matter on the public record. And there is a practice of accounting officers coming and bringing people. And there have been several other occasions where we did name people that we would like to accompany accounting officer, and all previous occasions that level of cooperation happened and that person came. But it was always technically at the behest of the accounting officer as to who he chose to bring. So, as I've already said, I feel it was disrespectful for us to hear last night that a person that we had asked to come was not coming, but it is at his behest. Paul Quinn or any other assistant secretary or senior officer is not answerable to the PAC, only the accounting officer.
Okay, that's correct.
So we just want to put that on the record.
I get that in there.
So and the only way that's the rules we work, and we work with cooperation.
So they're the literal rules. So effectively, if Mr. Watt wanted to bring the groundsman from the OPW in to assist him, that's a matter for him.
Yeah.
But clearly, when we're talking about the biggest expenditure, capital expenditure project in the state, it's probably, a good educated guess that the person that's head of procurement for the state might have some value to add. And we were hinted at previous correspondence that in effect this person wouldn't be made available because it said that the accounting officer would decide. So fine, he's within the rules. Can the chair, the clerk or whoever advise, who do we subscribe to, who do we petition to change the rules in future? Because I think if we're examining public expenditure and there are people who are heads of particular functions like public procurement and the Public Accounts Committee, because of some euphemistic interpretation of the practice or the rules, exclude in a vexatious fashion the person that we want to talk to. I totally disagree, Chairman, with your assessment that because this person served on the board, it was a matter for health, and when we're looking at that again, sorry, it's coincidental the man happened to be on the board. The reality is his function is public procurement, and we're looking at things like tendering and so on. That person adds value. If they don't, and I'm sure Mr. Watt will be perfectly fluent in answering all those questions to do a tendering later on. If he's not, perhaps maybe there'll be some other person he wants to bring in. I particularly don't care, but I do see it's a continuing, I suppose, annoyance of officialdom with Public Accounts Committee and its role to ask questions. And if we're to put up with this kind of thing, we might as well just declare an actual dictatorship instead of the virtual one we're currently living in and abolish committees all in all, because the tail is wagging the dog. I mean, I've read this opening statement, and frankly, the most political of political speeches by any minister in the past from whatever party would barely be as good in terms of blowing one's own trumpet. In terms of policy. We're not interested necessarily in policy today, as Mr. Watt well knows. We're interested in the intricacies of why $1 billion of the public's money, which this time last year was not going to be needed, is now needed. And all we have is an 18-page document from the chief officer responsible to this committee, who manages not to mention the National Children's Hospital once. Now, that is a Harvey Smith to this committee. The two fingers will do what we want, when we want, and then it lists a whole series of suggested improvements that are going to be made at some stage in the future. But as always, the public, there's no accountability.
Deputy Murphy.
Yeah, actually, I was the one that looked for him to come in, given that he's the head of the Office of Government Procurement. And we had a discussion about this last week, and essentially this is entirely within the remit of the Public Accounts Committee, because this is about process and failure of process. And we need to understand those failures of process, because it does appear that there's an institutional gap. And without being able to, explore this with that official about what exactly his remit is, like, for example, would you be looking at industry norms in relation to, a contract being, and where a bid is in terms of whether or not it is, good tendering practice, and what advice he might be able to give us. There's no point in having the head of government procurement who effectively can control the purchase of biros and give advice and ensure that proper procurement happens, if then we don't have people controlling the big projects where the public will be concerned in relation to how tendering happens, how a particular type of arrangement happens, like, for example, a special committee happens, and what control there is of that. It would be enormously helpful to us, given that he has the dual roles of being head of office of government procurement, and also having been on the board of the National Children's Hospital. He's in a unique position to give us that insight. Now, we said that this morning was going to be about capital projects and control of capital projects. I mean, does he have a role in this at all? You would have to ask. And I would like to have asked him that, about what his role is. I've got to say, I'm really deeply angry that the decision has been made to essentially exclude him from that discussion, which I think is a very valid discussion.
Deputy Kelly. Oh, sorry, I think Deputy O'Brien was first and then Deputy Kelly.
Yeah, Chair, look, I mean, we'll ask Mr. Watt in a minute why Mr. Quinn is not here. I think I'm up first, so I'll be asking him that direct question. But I think Mr. Quinn gave evidence to this committee on the 25th of February, written evidence, and that came on headed paper from the Office of Government Procurement. It didn't come as an individual. It didn't come as a member of the Hospital Development Board. It came on headed paper, Office of Government Procurement, and he made a number of assertions within that written correspondence, which I personally would have liked to have tested today, given the fact that he is the person in charge of government procurement. And this is the meeting, as far as I'm concerned, where that evidence should have been tested, because we are dealing with major capital projects, tendering and procurement. He is the person who has the answers to those questions, and I think it's very unfortunate that we're not able to test evidence from a witness who has given written evidence to the committee, and I think Mr. Watt will have to explain why he did not choose to bring Mr. Quinn to the meeting today. I hope for Mr. Watt's sake that he has all the answers that we're going to be asking today, because if he doesn't, the very person who has those answers, he decided was not needed. So it's a judgment call on behalf of Mr. Watt. It remains to be seen whether it was a good judgment call or a bad judgment call. We'll know that at the end of today's proceedings.
Okay, Deputy Kelly.
Yeah, there's two aspects to this, and they've been touched on. But first is the fact that as a committee we can't actually ask somebody like the head of government procurement to our committee and expect him to come. It's news to me, being honest with you. I accept what you're saying, but then we need to change it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just bizarre. So the public are watching this. Yeah. The person who sat on the board, who's the head of public procurement in the whole of Ireland, and the Public Accounts Committee can't ask him questions.
Today.
No, wait a second. According to what you said, Chair,
any day,
we can't ask him questions any day where his Secretary General decides he doesn't have to come. Now, that is not right. There is something wrong in the rules if that is the interpretation. And we're going to have to change them. Yeah. And we're going to have to ensure because that's not transparency. This is the person. So if we ask Mr. Watt, who I know quite well, very obviously was in government previously, we'll ask him lots of questions, he'll do his best to answer them, I'm sure. But specifically into detail, the man who's sitting on the board and who's head of procurement in all of Ireland, he won't be able to get down to the same level as him.
Okay.
Like, so we're basically one arm tied behind our backs. And this is a real issue. So, as regards the work that we're meant to do today, and I presume the Finance Committee will be getting the same steer, basically, we won't be able to get into the level of detail on behalf of the taxpayer regarding the hundreds of millions that we need to. That's the first part. But let me just say this. This is the second component of this I want to say. So, we now found out today that as a committee we can't ask somebody like the head of public procurement in the whole of Ireland through this committee. And if we asked them 1,000 times and they said 1,000 times no, then that's it. We can't do anything about it. So we need to change the rules. That's the first thing. Second thing is this. The Secretary-General wrote to this committee and said that he, as accounting officer, would decide who's coming. That's fine. I have no issue with that. And that was a few weeks ago. But, you know, it goes beyond what's reasonably fair or the way in which to, act, to actually send a letter the night before, while we're after spending how long preparing and expecting that we would have the head of public procurement in Ireland in front of us. Now, as chair of the committee, I know you've expressed your annoyance at that, but before we start today, I would expect and ask that you make it very clear that that isn't appropriate. That is not the way to deal with things.
Deputy Cullinane, we'll wrap. Deputy Connolly, and we'll wrap it up now in a minute.
Chair, I think we have an obligation to act within our remit.
Yeah.
I'm equally as disappointed that Mr. Quinn isn't coming, but we have an obligation to act within our remit, and the remit is the General Secretary to appear before.
No, Counting Officer.
Counting Officer, sorry, the Counting Officer. That's number one. Number two, it would be very helpful to have Mr. Quinn, but as it stands, we need to address those questions to the accounting officer today. I would have thought it would have made sense to have him here. He's particularly important. As it's been said, he is written on Office of Government Procurement paper, headed paper. His title there is the Chief Procurement Officer. Yeah. Chief Procurement Officer. He also sat on the Financial Subcommittee, and he also sat on the Procurement Subcommittee of the Children's Board. So I accept the remit of the committee that it has to be the accountants officer, and I think you have a duty to lay that out as you have done. Within that restriction, how we see if the governance is working is the question. And the nominee of the state had a particular role on the committee. He said he was there in a personal capacity, but he actually had a particular role to note back. And he set that out, and I thank him for doing that. He set that out on the 25th of February, and he set out the criteria, the circumstances within which he would have to go back to his minister. And where there were serious weaknesses in controls, where there was a strategic or reputational risk and so on, quite clearly we know there was a serious reputational risk. So it would be helpful to have him here today. How the accountancy officer can deal with these questions without having him here will be interesting to see. And I think we should proceed with the meeting and find out how he's going to deal with that and see how we can deal with the very obvious gaps.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is quite unusual, and I normally wouldn't do this, Chair, but given what has been reported, I think it needs to be aired at the Public Accounts Committee, that a journalist tweeted that he overheard Mr Watt outside the chamber say that following this conversation that you as Chair should control the mob being us, the members of this committee. Now, I think that's outrageous. If that is the case, I'm saying that is what has been reported. It feeds into what I was saying earlier, that there's a serious pushback by senior representatives. If that was said, it's completely unacceptable. Completely unacceptable that before an accounting officer even comes before the Public Accounts Committee and on foot of reasonable and genuine criticisms which have been put forward by members of this committee, that I stress it's been reported, and we'll put it to Mr Watt when he comes in, that he refers to members of this committee as a mob.
Okay.
And I think that's outrageous, unacceptable if that was said, and it again sets a very, very bad scene now for this meeting. It's already sullied by the fact that the person that we wanted to be before the committee is not here. And you have a duty as well to protect members of this Public Accounts Committee. Can I ask, did you meet Mr Watt?
Just a few minutes ago.
Just beforehand?
Yeah.
Well,
right. Okay.
I don't know where we're going here.
Okay. No, I'm bringing it to a conclusion now at this stage, right?
No, I accept, but this is just
okay.
getting a bit
I
bizarre
get the
now.
Deputy MacSharry, I just want to...
I'm sorry. This is new information, and I'm just seeing now online. I have a problem with that. But bring him in. Let's go ahead with the meeting. I have no difficulty with that. But I would ask members and yourself, Chairman, to consider the following. Albeit not the practice, albeit not within our authority under the flawed rules that currently exist, as you advised, can I suggest and ask committee members whether we would consider a special session next week where we invite Mr Quinn in his role as Chief Procurement Officer of the state to attend this committee on his own. And if Mr Watt wants to overrule that decision, let him do so publicly.
Okay, so I want to protect the committee.
Chair, just one last thing,
Yeah.
given what's transpiring, maybe, I don't know if it's up to you, you're the chair, but maybe you might want to have a word or have a chat with the officials. Yeah,
I haven't seen that tweet. Now, I just want to say, by way of public information, so the public are watching this, right? It's highly frustrating. I was on public record for the last fortnight saying he's coming today, Paul Quinn, because we understood that we had issued the invitation to the Secretary General, the Accounting Officer, and we named Mr Paul Quinn. And there has never been a situation that I can recall that a named senior official that was requested to come hasn't come. So this is very strange ground we're in. And I would say it was very discourteous to this committee one, for the person not to be here, but two, only to hear about it late last night. That's the first thing I have to say. No, sorry.
No, as a member of the committee, okay. I heard it through the media.
I want to say this. Members of this committee who received, a member, minimum of one, who received the letter, the email that we all received yesterday evening, immediately, a member of this committee immediately sent it to a journalist, right? And the journalist rang me and he had our letter. So a member of this committee, I'm not saying, I have no idea who it was. So a member of this committee, the minute it arrived to the members last night, immediately forwarded to the journalist. I want to give another example of what has happened by a member of the committee within the past week or so. There was an item of correspondence was received by the Secretariat and circulated to the members of the committee in quite recently. When it came in, they looked at it and they circulated it to the members of the committee. After it went up and the official spot, there was an embarrassing typing mistake in the particular document. I just used those words carefully. Immediately phoned the relevant department saying, we've got your thing, we're after, there's an embarrassing typo in it from your point of view. And immediately the department said, we have already had an inquiry from a journalist on that matter. So within the hour of our correspondence being circulated to members of this committee, some member of the committee has a system in place to immediately forward our correspondence to journalists. So within the hour, that journalist was able to contact the department about the typo that are now, and within the hour, the Secretariat phoned that department to alert them and said a journalist has already been on. So what happened last night was some member of this committee gave it to the journalist. It wasn't the journalist's fault, some member of this committee. And that's why our interim reports and periodic reports are not being circulated, because some member, the minute they get it, they forwarded it on to journalists, and I have no idea who it is. So I just want to say that, and that's why, as Chairman, it's dreadful, and that's what we're dealing with. And some of that fault lies within this committee as to why you heard it on tweet or from a journalist or whatever source last night, or it's in the papers. Now, next thing I just want to say is, by way of public information again, and I have to stress, there are approximately 40 votes approved by the Oireachtas for estimates each year, approximately 40, 41. There are 15 Secretary Generals or accounting officers. So the accounting officer in many departments is the accounting officer for a group of votes within his department. Robert Watt is the accounting officer for the Office of Government Procurement. Full stop. Paul Quinn is not an accounting officer. He is not answerable to this committee.
We know that.
Well, no, some people thought...
Sure, if that was the case, Chairman, in fairness to you, and I know that you're quoting the letter of the law,
no,
this committee would have 40 witnesses on an annual basis and nobody else.
Yeah.
Now, would the work in terms of outcomes of this committee, where it's done positive work in the past, been possible if we were to limit our output to 40 individual witnesses, being the 40 accountancy officers for the 40 votes? And this question is to you, not the clerk. This question is to you, not the clerk, with respect to the clerk. Okay, we're all around long enough. You know, so if we all want to take a literal interpretation, whatever, that's fine. I also asked at the beginning, and we got no answer from the clerk. Maybe you'll consult with the clerk there. How do we change these rules that we're not happy about?
I'm going to answer.
Sorry. You can't bring it. You can't stop it unless we all make our contributions.
No, I'm not doing anything. I'm just
signalling I want to come back in.
I listen to everybody.
Chair, just on a point of order, I don't think this is appropriate today. I think we should start the meeting and bring in the accounting officer. That's what I believe at this point. All other items should be discussed at another time.
I was speaking a moment ago. And the point that Deputy MacSharry raised, we have been dealing with that. On the group of votes for the Department of Taoiseach, we brought in 6 different votes here in one day. In recent, we had all the legal office of the Attorney General, Chief State Office, Chief State Solicitor's Office, the Attorney General's Office. We had a group of other bodies from that. So we've regularly combined groups within the vote. Regularly when we have an accounting officer, it covers 3 and 4 votes. So there are 40 votes, but the accounting officers are the people answerable. And the head of the department, for example, we had the head of the prison service here just recently with the Department of Justice. The Secretary General of the Department of Justice is the accounting officer for the prison service. Technically, the head of the prison service wasn't required to be, could have not come if that was their decision. I'm just giving people to understand. We have an exact specific remit from the Committee of Procedures. And I'm just around long enough to know that. I don't have to read it up. And they are the rules that the accountable officer, the accounting officer is the person accountable to this committee. And Robert Watt is the accounting officer for the Office of Government Procurement. And one reason we did write, I would just want for people to understand this. I want to give people information. I see that as my job. One reason we had we had spoken about Mr. Quinn. Another reason was how they got a derogation from the Office of Public Procurement in relation to the National Children's Hospital, and that's the detailed letter we got here. And I just want to explain that derogation was granted by the Government Contracts Committee for Construction as a consultative committee forum for the discussion and development of policy in the tendering and contracting of all aspects of construction projects. And I also want to say that that derogation was granted by the Government Contracts Committee for Construction. And the chairman of that committee, the chairperson of the committee that granted the derogation, is here today as a witness. He is Mr. David O'Brien. Paul Quinn was not part of that process. There's a separate contracts committee. If people had read the correspondence, the chairperson of that committee, I've been informed, is David O'Brien, who is here today to explain how that committee gave a derogation in relation to that issue. So we have the chairman who gave that derogation here today. We have the accounting officer for the Office of Government Procurement here today. And we will have Mr. Paul Quinn here in a matter of weeks when we get the report on the cost overruns. I'm just saying, and they are the rules of the House of who's entitled to be here. I genuinely am saying it again. I find it discourteous that the specific request we made wasn't granted. I would say by the same token, when Robert Watt is here today as Secretary General, if the committee was of a mind, we could say, you're here on your own and you're not entitled to have people with you as backup. You're the sole accounting officer. But a level of courtesy should work both ways. And yes, we're disappointed, but they are the rules of the House. And if people want them to change, it's a matter for the committee of privilege. That's it. And we can make progress here.
I propose we petition the committee of privilege.
That's another thing.
Can I just make one small contribution if I can? I don't want to hold the meeting up.
We can do work today and we can deal with Mr Quinn, and we're sticking with dinner. And I'm not getting technical because of recent things. I understood all along he was there, and he was responsible for the line minister in relation to the cost overrun. It's the line minister who appointed him to the board, which was the Minister for Health, not the Minister for Public Expenditure. And if people don't get that, well, that's the way it is. That's all I'm saying.
I don't want to hold the meeting up, but I also don't want anybody to be under any misapprehension that members of this committee don't understand the rules. Yeah. We understand perfectly the rules that the accounting officer is Mr Watt. He can come on his own, but as we know, accounting officers bring officials with them to help them. Now, we had accounting officers from universities and institutes of technology here dealing with finance. They bring the finance officers because that's the officers that you bring. So it was, I genuinely believe there was a reason why Mr Quinn is not here today, and it was a decision taken by Mr Watt for him not to come, and we'll ask him when he comes. But we understand the rules. Nobody was under the impression that Mr Quinn is an accounting officer or had to be here or could be compelled to come here, but he was asked in a courteous way through Mr Watt that he would be here. Yeah. And we heard it. And by the way, we can blame members of the committee for leaking information, and members of the committee do leak information, but the department also were quoted in the media that I've seen. So the department are well able to spin as well and brief the media. So let's not put all the blame on members of the committee. There are undoubtedly members of the committee that very unfairly leak documents where me and other members of the committee learned through the media that Mr Quinn wasn't coming, and we were getting media queries. So I just think there has to be a bit of balance there as well, but we understand the rules. But what's happened today is that in a very discourteous way, in terms of how we found out, and also the decision not to invite him or not to allow him to come here today, I think was wrong. Okay, look, we have to move. I am just saying we've made the point well enough. I think we can proceed. We have to finish at 1 o'clock because he's scheduled for another Oireachtas committee, and we're not eating into they're entitled to their slot after lunch as well. So we will be stopping here at 1 o'clock. And I think we understand the situation is unsatisfactory, but the reason I spelled out the remit of the committee is there are members of the public are watching this that they may not have been aware. I know members here are aware, but the broader public and other members of this Oireachtas are not aware of our remit because some of them think we're outside remit all the time when we're not. So I just make that point too, and I hope they're listening as well. At this stage, we're going to suspend for a moment while the witnesses take their seats. Today we're examining the historical and continuing role of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in relation to oversight and implementation of projects under the National Framework for Capital Investment and under the National Development Plan. The focus for today's meeting is on the Department's role in ensuring that value for money is achieved through the systematic appraisal and professional management of all capital projects. We also wish to explore the role of public officials on state boards. The matter for consideration today arose initially in relation to our meeting with the National Paediatric Hospital Board, and we will be engaging with that board again in the coming weeks. Today is not today. I'm just saying, I have a note, but the point I want to make is there's a list of 10 major capital projects that are currently in various stages of development are listed before us, one of which is the National Children's Hospital. I want to put in context the 140 billion under this plan. The Children's Hospital would represent about 2% of that amount of money, and I would say because of the issues that happened there, we as a committee have concern, is that going to happen in relation to all other major projects, and what control mechanisms are in place to deal with that. And we want to ensure that commitments given are delivered within cost and value for money is achieved.
So that's really why we're here today, not just one particular project, several projects. And we're joined today by Mr. Robert Watt, Secretary General of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, David O'Brien, Principal Officer of the Office of Government Procurement, and I think I'm right in saying that Mr. O'Brien is the Chairman of, just let me clarify that, you're the Chairman of the Government Contracts Committee for Construction.
That's correct. Yeah.
That's correct. I want to put that in the record because that's an issue of concern in relation to the derogation for a particular project. David Feeney, Principal Officer, and Ciara Morgan, Assistant Principal Officer. Members should note that Mr. Watt is the Accounting Officer for the Office of Government Procurement. I want to remind members and witnesses and those in the public gallery to turn off all mobile phones, as merely putting them on silent will still interfere with the recording system. I wish to advise the witnesses that by virtue of Section 17(2)(1) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to the committee. If you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. Members of the committee are reminded of Standing Orders number 186 that the committee shall also refrain from inquiring into the merits of a policy or policies of the government or a minister of the government or the merits of the objectives of such policy. While we expect witnesses to answer questions put to the committee clearly and with candour, witnesses can and should expect to be treated fairly and with respect and consideration at all times in accordance with the witness protocol. So at this stage, before I call Mr. Watt, we had quite a discussion about the non-appearance of Paul Quinn, who the committee had specifically sought. So I know Deputy Jonathan Bryan is the first speaker, might want to raise that particular issue. I won't get into it any further. I'm just putting you on notice. And plus, another matter I want to put you on notice, there's a comment that remark attributed to yourself was tweeted a few moments ago in connection with this committee. And maybe I'll ask Mr. if Deputy O'Brien wants to raise that at the beginning, or would you like to clarify it? Yeah, please clarify it. There's a report here, Deputy Cullinane, and this is a very tight, specific point before we get into the business of the meeting, because we only wrote in the last 2 minutes. Deputy Cullinane, what did you say?
And I was very careful that it was reported. I mean, nobody in the committee heard that we were in here doing our business. It was reported by a journalist, a very responsible journalist, that you had been quoted as saying that the chair, Mr. Fleming, needs to control the mob being members of this committee. Obviously, that was the case, and we're asking you if that was the case. That would be deeply unsatisfactory.
Look, Deputy, I don't know what I said. If I said anything that offended anybody, apologies for that.
So you did say it?
I don't recall saying it, to be honest, but if I did say it, it's a colloquial expression. It's not in any way to be demeaning of anybody.
That sounds like me. That sounds like you did say it, Mr. Well.
I don't actually recollect, to be honest, and I don't get into the business of
if the remark was made,
tweets or
what are you saying?
Oh no! Look, if anybody takes offence to what I said, Chair, apologies for saying anything that. But it's
right. Okay.
No,
I think
that's not good enough now. That's not good enough.
Right. A member can come back. I just want to put in the record, because that remark was brought to my attention in the last few minutes, and I just want to clear the air on that. So I am now asking Mr. Watt to give.
Apology would be nice.
Look, if I have said something to offend the committee, of course, Chair, I apologise, but it's not meant to be offensive remark. Like it's a. Yeah. Okay. Look, every chairperson is job. Anyway, okay.
We'll ask you now to proceed with your opening statement.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the invitation to be here to discuss the oversight and implementation of capital projects. And you've already introduced, Chair, the colleagues who are with me, and to emphasise the point in relation to David O'Brien, who's chairman of the Government Construction Contracts Committee, which is relevant in terms of derogations from the standard procedure in relation to lump sum contracts. There is compelling evidence that efficient capital investment is central to long-term economic well-being. Efficient capital investment allows the economy to grow.
If it's with the committee's permission, could we take this as read? I think. No. Okay.
There's not agreement, so proceed.
It's not a shame because it's 16 pages. It doesn't mention what we're here to talk about.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
And I read it last night, albeit 25 to 8.
One of the reasons it's put in the public record, because people are watching this on television. They need to hear it.
Yeah, like I'm happy.
If you can skip a,
I'm happy to
a sentence or
get
two
to
here and there, fine.
happy to get to the highlights, Chair. Yeah, as fast as I can. Yeah.
I'd like to see them. Sorry.
Chair, just 1 second. No. This has been prepared. I'd like to hear it. The
On the
public
record.
would like to hear it. If Mr. Watt chooses to make 18 pages, that's Mr. Watt's decision. But it is a matter of courtesy to the members to read it. It's usually what we do. And rushing through it and mumbling through it, I don't mean you mumbling, but anybody, I beg your pardon, anyone mumbling through it, it's prepared.
Okay.
Let's hear what it
for the record,
it's significant,
read the
it's
full
significant that it's 18
onto the
pages.
record.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Record, the full statement.
So efficient capital investment allows the economy to go faster on a sustainable basis by raising productivity and supply capacity. This is an important role to play in alleviating capacity constraints that otherwise restrict economic and social progress. Value for money is a key policy objective, and policy seeks to support efficient and sustainable public investment. The selection, appraisal and delivery of individual public capital projects is the responsibility of each relevant department. My department is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the National Development Plan within Project Ireland 2040, supporting value for money and protecting sustainable capital investment of the state. In that context, Chair, I would like to discuss very briefly Project Ireland 2040, progress in relation to rollout of the different projects, the existing processes for selection, appraisal and delivery of public sector capital projects, including governance, and the plans in place to strengthen those processes. Project Ireland 2040 was launched a year ago. As deputies are aware, it seeks to achieve 10 strategic outcomes building around the overarching themes of well-being, equality and opportunity. It consists of the National Development Plan and the National Planning Framework, and seeks the alignment of investment with the spatial outcomes set out in the planning framework. Project Ireland 2040 moves beyond the historical approach of the past, which saw public investment spread too thinly and investment decisions which did not align with a spatial strategy. These practices contribute to some of the major issues we face today as a country, particularly the predominance of Dublin in terms of economic growth and development, alongside the challenges facing rural communities. Project Ireland seeks to develop particularly Cork, Limerick, Galway and Waterford as viable cities of scale which can act as alternatives and as a counterbalance to the continued growth of Dublin and its surrounding regions. These cities will act in the future as drivers of growth for their wider regions and rural areas. Over the first 10 years of Project Ireland 2040, 116 billion will be invested. Investment will reach 3.5% of national income, as defined as GNI star, not GDP, and over 4% of national income by 2027. This significant acceleration in investment is in line with national and international analysis that Ireland's public capital infrastructure needs to be substantially strengthened to support the resilience of the economy, particularly in response to risks such as Brexit. As deputies are aware, public capital spending was impacted as government sought to restore the public finances during the recession. This plan seeks to accelerate the necessary catch-up in public capital infrastructure. There's been a lot of recent commentary on the delivery of large-scale projects. In that commentary, we can lose sight of the significant progress that is being made. Project Ireland is already delivering better transport links, facilitating improved health and environmental outcomes and delivering more housing. And I won't go through, Chair, a list of projects, but just to highlight some of them. The National Road Network roads are being upgraded. The M11 Gorey Enniscorthy motorway will open to traffic later this year. This is the largest project underway in the state at present and is currently scheduled to be completed on time and within budget. Works are starting on key arteries in terms of the N4, as deputies will be aware, the RD bypass and the N22 and many other projects across the country. To improve our international connectivity, works commenced on the new runway at Dublin Airport last month, which is due to be operational by 2021. And this is a very significant project for Dublin Airport. And if you think the time it's taken to deliver this compared to high-profile runways in our nearest neighbour, I think it's useful to comment on the speed at which this project will be delivered. There will be over 90 new school building projects in construction this year, and over 300 schools will benefit from minor works improvements. 2019 will see the completion of the National Forensic Mental Hospital and the opening of 18 primary care centres throughout the country. 6,500 social housing units will be delivered, and when acquisitions and lease are added, that figure will reach 10,000. The Bandon Release Scheme will be completed this year, along with additional flood relief schemes. The projects upgrading the water supply in Drogheda and Dundalk will be completed this year, and projects to address water quality and capacity in other towns and cities will also begin this year. Sewer schemes in Blanchardstown, Athlone and Liffey Valley will also commence in 2019. The majority of recent projects have been delivered on time and on budget. I'd like to highlight a few of them. The N22 Tralee bypass was completed on time at a cost of over 70 million, which was under budget. The N25 Corkside Ring Road inter-exchange upgrade was completed at a cost of 81.5 million. The North Docklands Sewer Scheme was completed. The Waterford Towns and Villages wastewater project was completed on budget at just under 26 million. And Phase 2 of the National Indoor Arena is expected to be completed ahead of schedule this month at a cost of 26 million. And this highlights, notwithstanding the challenges that do exist, Chair, which we'll no doubt discuss later, this highlights the professionalism that does exist across many sectors in delivering public capital programmes. To support departments as they work to achieve value for money and investment in capital infrastructure, a suite of key reforms have been introduced to support the efficient implementation of Project Ireland and its objectives. The Land Development Agency has been set up by the Department of Housing to ensure optimal use of state land. 4 new funds have been set up focused on urban and rural investment, climate action and disruptive technology to prioritise funding to the best projects. These will be managed by the relevant line departments. A construction sector group has been established to ensure regular and open dialogue between government and the construction sector. And this is important in addressing the various capacity issues, the skills issues that exist in the sector, and the need for the government and the system to work collaboratively with the sector to try and improve performance in the years ahead. Project 2040 Delivery Board meets regularly to ensure the effective leadership of the implementation overall. The Investment Projects and Programme Office has been established in my department to coordinate reporting on Project Ireland and drive reforms including strengthened business case and project appraisal. A capital projects tracker is published on our website to inform citizens of the variety of projects being implemented in their area and to give a greater overview to the construction and infrastructure sectors. This tracker is currently being updated. A capability and capacity review of public sector bodies is now being commenced in our department to ensure the state's delivery practice are to the highest standards. And this reflects a concern, Chair, that the capacity and performance of bodies does vary depending on their historical role in terms of delivering infrastructure, and given the scale of this project and the demands placed on departments that previously wouldn't have been managing projects, it's felt necessary to stand back and do a review of their capability. As part of the ongoing reform of Ireland's capital management system, the Office of Government Procurement is conducting a review of construction strategy, and we are reviewing in our department the Public Spending Code. The purpose of these 2 reviews is to strengthen the existing guidance to better align with the realities of project delivery and with a particular focus on improved financial management, cost estimation and management. I would like to touch on the processes that are currently in place to ensure the effective selection, appraisal, delivery and oversight of capital projects. Let me stress that the management, delivery and oversight of individual projects within the agreed allocations is a key responsibility of every department and minister. Government receives regular reports informing them of actual expenditure, and my department is in regular contact with all departments and offices to ensure that actual expenditure has been managed within the overall fiscal parameters. In addition, the drawdown of funds from the Exchequer is monitored and reported on against profile on a monthly basis in the Exchequer statement that's published. There are a number of processes and guidance in place to support departments and ministers in securing value for money. I'd like to discuss some of these, if I may, in relation to the Public Spending Code and the Public Procurement Rules. The Public Spending Code is the set of rules, procedures and guidance to ensure value for money in public expenditure. The Public Spending Code encompasses guidance on a variety of issues related to the management of expenditures at each stage of the expenditure cycle. This includes central guidance on the application of appraisal and evaluation methodologies, including cost-benefit analysis. The Public Spending Code sets out the oversight and approval process for public expenditure proposals, including capital projects. Governance and clear lines of responsibility are key to successful public capital investment. The Public Spending Code supports this by clearly setting out the responsibilities which lie with different roles. The main roles are the sponsoring agency and the sanctioning authority. The department or agency promoting and implementing a project is the sponsoring agency. It is responsible for appraisal, planning, implementation, management and post-project review of the project. The sponsoring agency is responsible for developing a project proposal which is then submitted to the sanctioning authority for decision on approval at key designated gates in the project life cycle. The department or body funding the project and who is responsible for project approval is the sanctioning authority. It is responsible for approval in principle at the key gates in the project life cycle, namely following appraisal, approval to proceed to tender, approval to accept a tender if the project has significantly changed such as an increase in costs. The sponsoring agency is responsible for the management and monitoring the implementation of the project. The sanctioning authority must be satisfied that the agency has appropriate systems to ensure the project is delivered in line with what has been approved. If adverse developments occur which affect the desirability or viability of the project, the sponsoring agency must report to the sanctioning authority. Sponsoring agency and sanctioning authority roles can lie within separate public sector bodies. For a regeneration social project, typically the relevant local authority will be the sponsoring agency and the Department of Housing will be the sanctioning authority. Sponsoring agency and sanctioning authority roles can also be within one body. For example, the maintenance projects funded by local authorities, the local authority may be both the sponsoring agency and the sanctioning authority. For larger projects over 100 million, and this is a key point, the government is the ultimate sanctioning authority. For practical purposes in respect of those projects, the relevant department will of course lead on that project. The Public Spending Code is supplemented in some instances by sectoral-specific appraisal guidance. These are developed by the relevant department and set out additional requirements and parameters specific to the sector while remaining in line with the Public Spending Code. And they might relate, for example, in relation to the transport sector, there are specific rules and cost-benefit analysis of transport projects that may differ from the cost-benefit approach in other areas of public policy. Public procurement rules cover the acquisition of work supplies and services by public bodies. National rules governing public procurement must comply with the relevant EU, WTO and national legal requirements and obligations. The aim of European and national rules is to promote an open, competitive and non-discriminatory public procurement regime. The high-level review and reporting structures set out in the Public Spending Code are key to better project management and form the basis of the guidance material on project management that is set out in the Capital Works Management Framework, which was first published in 2007. All public works projects that are delivered under the Exchequer-funded element of the plan must be procured in accordance with the provisions laid out in the Capital Works Management Framework. The framework is mandated by Circular and was developed to provide an integrated set of contractual provisions, guidance material, technical templates and procedures which cover all aspects of the delivery process of a public works concept, from inception to final project delivery, and review to assist contracting authorities in meeting their requirements. The public works contract is a key component of the framework and is a lump sum fixed price contract which is used on most projects, not all projects, but most public works contracts. This framework is maintained by the Office of Government Procurement in conjunction with the Government Contracts Committee for Construction, and as mentioned, David O'Brien, who is with me today, is the chair of that committee. And this committee has representatives from all the main sanctioning authorities and bodies across the public service. It is possible for public bodies to seek a derogation from the use of the standard form of contract from the Government Contracts Committee. This process may be used for complex or large projects which have specific requirements which do not naturally fit within the standard lump sum contracts and has been availed of by a number of sanctioning authorities. A derogation, if agreed, does not approve the approach or strategy of the authority, but simply acknowledge that the circumstances are such as to warrant a different approach than the standard. It is a matter for the contracting authority and the sanctioning authority to satisfy themselves as to the adequacy of the approach with regards to compliance with procurement rules and project appraisal in accordance with the Spending Code. Reform is an element of Project Ireland 2040. We also have to learn from experiences, both good and bad, and there is no doubt the experience of delivering capital projects highlights the need to step up the pace of reform still further. The delivery of large, complex, multi-year capital projects in a construction market which is impacted by shortened economic cycles brings many challenges in terms of tender price volatility, skill shortages, etc. This is why the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform has recently set out a further suite of reforms. Number one, we need more certainty on project costs. Government will no longer pre-commit to major bespoke projects until there is 100% clarity on tendered costs. The Government will approve major projects to be evaluated and designed, but there will be no final commitment until the final tendering process is complete. It is not possible to know the price of a capital project with a high level of certainty unless there is a full design spec, planning if necessary has been achieved and the project has been competitively tendered. In future, Government will not commit to projects unless the design and price are clear. This could delay projects, and which I know will be an issue, but will ensure greater cost certainty. And there is a trade-off, Chair, between timeliness and cost certainty in relation to large bespoke projects, because the time it can take to develop the detailed design in many cases can be years, That increases the cost certainty, but it does take time. And of course, it also involves expenditure upfront. And depending on a final decision on a project, that may involve expenditure which ultimately is not leading to an end product or a final build. We need more realistic costs and a better understanding of costs in capital project. In future, the budgets of large bespoke projects will include a significant premium for risk, so that cost estimates are more realistic. As risk is managed through the project life cycle, the risk premium will reduce. For example, a project on a brownfield site with a high degree of complexity, which has not been fully designed, would have a higher risk premium incorporated into its budget. As the risk is managed, this premium should reduce over time. The revised Capital Works Management Framework will require departments and their agencies to improve the quality of information on projects as they are implemented. This will improve decisions on projects and allow projects to use digital technologies such as the Building Information Modelling BIM to improve how efficiently they are developed. And this is another significant challenge for sanctioning authorities in ensuring that the information is there at the outset to ensure that we can use the technology embedded in the BIM approach. As part of the reviews of Ireland's capital management systems, my department will conduct a full assessment of how cost estimation for capital projects could be improved. This will include exploring the potential of external peer review of cost estimates for projects over a certain size. We also need to strengthen our capital management systems. As I mentioned, we are reviewing our capital management system. The Office of Government Procurement is conducting a review of construction strategy, and we are reviewing the Public Spending Code. The purpose of these reviews is to examine how capital projects are currently selected, designed and delivered, and to strengthen those processes, taking account of lessons. The review will result in a number of changes, and just to highlight, if I may, Chair, 2 changes at this point. One being earlier identification of projects. At present, departments are typically presented with projects which are fully formed and where the delivery method and project roles and responsibility have already been set. In future, departments will engage at an earlier stage to have more input into project roles and responsibilities, delivery method, critically, identification of risk and discussion on costs. And secondly, finally, a number of high-profile projects have highlighted issues with the performance of advisory firms. We will seek to link payments to advisory firms to clear performance standards. We will bring in performance standards into payments in future contracts for those firms. So that's, Chair, I hope, a very quick run-through of our approach to what is a very complex area involving many different types of projects, many different agencies and authorities across the public service, and look forward to engaging with the committee on these.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Watt. And now the following speakers have indicated so far in this sequence. Jonathan O'Brien, first speaker, has 20 minutes. Alan Kelly, second speaker, has 15 minutes. Alan Farrell, my mistake. Alan Farrell was down. Yeah, I know. Yeah, say nothing. Yeah, and then the other speakers in the following sequence will be Marc MacSharry, Alan Kelly, Catherine Connolly, David Cullinane, and Catherine Murphy. So I'm going to stick strictly to the time. You've often heard me saying this, but to allow every member here, there's nearly a full membership here today. The meeting finishes at 1 o'clock. Because Mr. Watt is appearing before another Oireachtas committee, and out of respect for the other committee, we're not going to delay their proceedings. So we have over 2.5 hours to do our work. So, Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, and I'll stick to my time limit because I'll be at the Finance Committee as well after dinner, so I can follow up on any questions that we miss out on,
never ends.
Mr. Watt.
Look at you.
Never ends, huh?
Never ends, yeah. Can I first of all ask why you didn't think it was appropriate for Mr. Quinn to be here today as one of your officials?
Thank you, Deputy. So, when it comes to attendance of committees, what I try to do is to, obviously I'm the accounting officer, I'm responsible, so I'm here as the main person to answer questions, and I bring along the people who I think can help me in ensuring that we answer questions. And I think in fairness to our engagement in the past, we've always tried to be upfront and have the information to hand, and if not, my colleagues can help us. So I chose the people today who are in a position to help answering the questions. In relation to Paul, David O'Brien is the chair of the Government Contracts Committee. That was the committee that was involved in the consultation with the National Children's Board in relation to the type of procurement process that might be desirable for this project.
And their involvement was done at the initiation of Mr. Quinn, wasn't it?
No. So the Government Contracts Committee is a committee that's there. It's part of the OGP, and it involves David's the chair. There are many different representatives from the main procuring bodies across the state.
Can I just maybe for some information, and this is one of the reasons why we wanted Mr Quinn here today, because he gave written evidence to the committee on the 25th of January, which we wanted to test. Now, I just put it to you that the GCCC, the contact with them was initiated by Mr Quinn, and you said no.
No.
And we have written evidence here which says the engagement between the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board began at my initiation as a member of that board in October 2013.
Yeah. So Paul is not a member of the Contracts Committee. Paul is a member of the board.
Yes.
Paul, in saying to the board that they should go and discuss with the Contracts Committee, was playing a role as a member of that board. But in terms of our department and our responsibility, David is chairperson of the relevant committee which is involved in discussing the approach with the derogation which I
Mr Quinn is also head of government procurement, yes?
Paul is head of the OGP, yeah.
I mean, there are questions that we wanted to ask around the... First of all, anyway, I mean, your opening statement doesn't even reference the National Children's Hospital, and I think that's bizarre, given that it's the largest capital project in the history of the state. It's going to be the most costly. It has one of the largest overruns, and to not even reference it, I just don't get that. It seems to me that it's almost like we're not going to, and there's a determination to not discuss the National Children's Hospital today with the Public Accounts Committee, and this is my opinion, that you didn't want Mr Quinn to appear before the committee because there would be awkward questions asked of him, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in that, but that's my opinion. I find it bizarre that he's not here, given his unique position as head of the Office of Government Procurement, and the fact that he was appointed by the Minister for Health in the public interest to serve on the development board.
So I think this issue has been discussed and debated elsewhere in committees in relation to...
Not with Mr Quinn, because he hasn't appeared before any committees.
He hasn't appeared before any committee. I'm here today to discuss our department's role, and our department's role is in relation to the overall management and oversight of capital projects. Procurement is an element of that. The Contracts Committee has a role to play. David is the chairperson of that committee, and that's why David is here with me to discuss the issues around procurement. Paul's role in this project was in relation as a member of the board, and I understand, Chair, that the board are being invited, and I'm sure Paul will attend the committee as a member of the board, which is appropriate given his role in relation to this project.
But he wrote to the committee...
is as a member of the board.
But he wrote to the committee and he gave written evidence to the committee as a member, as the head of Office of Government Procurement, not as a member of the board.
Yeah.
And the place we should be questioning that written evidence is at this meeting, because this is the meeting that is dealing with procurement and tendering. Yeah. This is the meeting that's dealing with capital projects. He wrote to the committee as the head of government procurement, and yet we cannot get an opportunity to question him.
But I'm here, Deputy, to answer your questions, and I've brought people with me, which I've prepared for this committee many times over the last 8 years, and I'm in a position to answer questions. If we're not in a position to answer questions, we will communicate with the Chair in the normal fashion, and I'm here to discuss the oversight and implementation of capital projects. That's what I'm here to talk about. I didn't directly reference the Children's Hospital, but I indirectly, of course, referenced it several times, talking about the experience of recent projects and the lessons we can learn from it. And my job here, and others may have another role, that's for them. My job here has been the person who's responsible for overall approach to capital management projects, is to learn the lessons from how we manage projects. And over the last number of weeks with colleagues and with ministers under who we have been debating and discussing how to improve the process. And I've set out today a variety of measures which the government have already taken, announced, and I'll reiterate them again, for the committee, which sets out a new approach, hoping to ensure that we manage projects as best we can. And I'm here to talk about the overall issue in relation to capital projects.
Okay,
as the Chair has said, and as everybody in this committee knows, I'm not the accounting officer for the Children's Hospital. That's another officer. Our department is not the sanctioning authority. We're not the sponsoring agency. We're not involved in the day-to-day. We're not involved in the evaluation of tenders. We're not involved in the National Children's Board as a department.
But you're the department that will then ultimately pay for it. We're
the department, the Minister for Finance and Public Expenditure will provide the allocation of funds. Which
so there is a responsibility from your end to ensure that any money which is spent by your department for capital projects is done so efficiently. So it's
our responsibility to have to management of the overall process, the public spending code, the procurement processes and public financial procedures to ensure that we manage projects as best we can. Okay. It's the responsibility of individuals, departments and authorities as relevant for the projects for which they are responsible.
Well then, let's discuss.
Like otherwise, Deputy, and I'm very happy to hear suggestions about how else we'd manage this. Otherwise, is it the suggestion that the Minister for Finance is responsible for every single capital project in the country? So that's not
there's nobody suggesting that, but I mean, if we can get down to some of the questions. Okay. Are you happy with the Department of Health's handling of this issue? As the person who is ultimately responsible for ensuring that the money was well spent?
So we have a project which is a very complex and difficult project, and that's been managed. Nobody is happy. I think the ministers are on record as saying, and Taoiseach has said this, nobody is happy about the overrun that's occurred. The government...
Have you been given any explanation of how that overrun escalated so quickly in such a short space of time?
So I think that the government approved in the spring of 2017 an estimate, construction was 980 million, and that's increased by circa 400 million since then. I think that's been set out very clearly, Chair, and other committees and in public commentary, the reasons for that. I think it's been documented by the Secretary-General to Health and the Minister, the reasons for that, and that's in the public record.
We're not in other committees, and I think this is your first appearance before any committee, Mr Watt, in relation to this particular issue. So what other people said is for them. I'm asking you, as the accounting officer for your department, who is ultimately responsible for forking out the money and the additional 450 million, are you happy that the processes were adhered to by the Department of Health?
So I'm happy that the project was managed by the Department of Health in line with the Public Spending Code. I think there are issues around the nature of this tendering process because we moved away from the lump sum contract and they sought a derogation which led to the two-stage process. The issue there was that the complexity of the project, and this has been set out by the board and others who are closer to this than me, the complexity of the project meant that it wasn't possible to have a detailed design set out, and they entered into a two-stage process where preliminary works were undertaken, and then the detailed design was set out, and when the detailed design was finalised, then it became apparent that the estimate that underpinned the contract in spring 2017 wasn't accurate.
And have you...
Now, I think there's a number of issues here for us, and I've set them out in the statement. I don't think we never know what the cost of something is until we have a detailed spec and a tendering process.
And that's one of the risks with the two-stage process, wasn't it?
That's one of the risks.
It was actually one of the risks which was identified.
There's two issues with the two-stage process in this case, which we've addressed in my remarks and which will have implications for future projects. Firstly is that we committed to very significant preliminary works before the final tender was established. And this case because the preliminary works were significant, there's 200 million. The Drimnagh sewer had to be moved. There was very significant enabling works, and those works were committed, and spending took place, significant spending, before the final cost. I think it's very clear that we shouldn't allow that to happen again. And the second issue was that we were given commitments in relation to the approximate bill of quantities that underpinned the contract. We were given commitments around how accurate they were, and that has not turned out to be the case. I think that's also an issue that's been well documented. And the government have committed to a review by PwC to look at.
I'm aware of what the government has committed, and I'm also. And sorry, Mr. Quinn, I'm also aware of what the minister has said he's going to introduce in terms of changes.
Yeah.
But if I can get back to the issue, the costs soared in a very short period of time, and nobody saw fit from the Department of Health or from the Development Board, which included civil servants who are obligated under a circular, and I'm well aware, before you tell me the governance structures, that it goes to the chairman of the board first and then he passes it on. Nobody saw fit to mention it to you, despite a memo from the HSE saying that it should be brought to the attention of your department as part of the budgetary process, and that didn't happen. How did that not happen? Have you asked anyone those questions?
So the issue of, and this again has been set out by the people who were responsible for the project, that there were discussions around increasing costs, and those were brought to the Minister for Health in August, September. We were told in November about this, and we asked for a detailed note. A detailed note, I think, came to us on November 19th. We had a discussion with the department, and we communicated with the Minister a few days afterwards in terms of that. So we were told about the significant cost issue at that stage, and we met with our colleagues in the Department of Health and the Minister. We engaged with the Minister at that stage on it.
But that engagement should have taken place prior to the budget, would you not agree?
Well, the Department of Health have said that they were establishing the figure. Like if they'd come to us in the middle of October and said we have an issue here, we'd have said, what's the issue? And they would have said, we don't know yet. Well, we would have said, when you establish, please, what it means, what the final cost issues are.
But we knew the figure at the end of August was at minimum 100 million overrun, potentially 391 million at that stage.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm not going to get in the ins and outs of this, Deputy, because it's not my responsibility. There were a whole variety of issues in relation to costs. There were costs that were identified in August, and then those costs came down, and then other issues appeared, as you know. So it's up. It serves absolutely no useful purpose for me and for this committee to get into the who knew, what, when, how. I've set out today what I think the lessons are for management of these projects, and I've set it out very clearly. That's what my focus has been over the last number of months.
Well, you do have a responsibility for the public spending code. I do. Okay. So as part of the public spending code, what mechanisms are in place from the department to oversee major capital projects? I mean, is there monthly updates, monthly reviews meant to be submitted by the contracting authority to the department and budget?
So we get monthly reports from each department on capital spending, which sets out. So we have a profile over 5 years of capital spend. So each department has their, the deputy aware of it, has their list of projects and has the allocations set out. So there's a profile built up. They're adjusted every year because some projects are further advanced than others, or some projects that are delayed for whatever reason. So there's an iterative process. Every year there's an annual allocation which is set out, voted upon by the Dáil. So against that allocation, that profile, we receive reports every month from each spending department, which sets out that Department X had a capital budget of 100 million. They're meant to spend 10 million in January. They spend 8 million or 9 million or 12 million. How we are, we report that.
So in relation to
me every month.
In relation to the Children's Hospital and those monthly reports that came in, there was no indication in those monthly reports.
So these monthly reports refer to actual spending, so the actual expenditure that took place in terms of the preliminary works for the hospital, the 200 million, which I think has been incurred to date, that was included in the monthly reports from the Department of Health.
And they don't look at future spending, those reports?
The reports that are sent to us are based on the actual spending, based on the profiles that are agreed and are voted on by the Dáil, and that's their monitoring process.
Okay, so there is no monitoring process under the Public Spending Code which looks at future spend. I mean, it does look at the budgets that are set.
So when authorities are looking at prospective projects and they're going through the different stages in deciding on priorities, on designing, appraisal, going to tender, post-tender, so the sanctioning authority has responsibility then to ensure that the project is in line. And what happens if a road project, there's a budget of X, and if the tender then came, if it was a project over 100 million, and the tender came out way above that, well, that matter will be brought to the attention of the government, so the government would have to decide whether to proceed with the road project or not. And then that higher spend, or lower spend, depends, it could happen, will be then reflected in the allocations for the department, and then we would monitor it accordingly.
There's a yearly report done in June, I think, isn't there? And it's submitted to the department.
Sorry, Deputy, there's a yearly report?
There's a yearly report done as well in June, which is submitted to your department.
There's a report done every month on capital spend.
But That's on the actual spend you're saying, so you're saying that that doesn't look at future spend, but there's also a yearly report done as well, and I think it's submitted to your department in June of every year.
Yeah. So
and there's a checklist of things which is contained within that report.
I don't know specifically now. There are many reports. Deputy, I can check exactly what. We now publish the construction report, which we publish.
You make an annual assessment of each department's compliance with the public spending code. You publish this assessment on your websites. The assessment is based on the department's quality assurance report.
Yes, so we do a review as part of the delegated sanction. Yeah. So we get assurance from the department. So the departments have to write to me, in effect, to say that they've checked that the processes are in place, that they have. So this is part of the due diligence we do. And as part of the delegated sanction, then they have to reassure me that they put in place the proper procedures and that they're aware of the public spending code, that they're aware of the procurement rules, and they're aware of the obligations under those different codes and rules.
And there's a number of checklists that they have to complete, and one of those checklists looks at future spending and whether there's been a proper appraisal done to whether and whether it's going to be within budget and everything.
They have to do an appraisal of a project of scale. They have to say for a project above 20 million, they have to do a cost-benefit analysis. They have to say to us they've done the cost-benefit analysis, and projects of a certain scale, people in our department would engage with the department to provide technical assistance and advice on parameters used to evaluate benefits and so on.
And so the assessment which was submitted by the Department of Health to your department in June, there was no indication in that there was an issue, despite
June of 2018. June of 2018.
Yeah.
So I can check the letter that was sent. I don't have it in front of me.
Because we know from the minutes of the Hospital Development Board, which is another reason why Mr. Quinn would have been attendance here today would have been useful, that there was an indication in as far back as March 2018 that there was potential for an overrun on the costs, and I'm just wondering, was that reflected in the assessment report which was submitted to your department?
We'll check. I doubt it was, Deputy, but we can check, because the cost issues, the serious cost issues that then came to light, are obviously over the period then August, September, October of last year.
When did you become aware, Mr. Watt, of the massive overrun?
So I became aware of the fact that the project was going to cost more than was set out in the memo, the spring 2017 memo. I heard in November. Mid-November, yeah.
So, I mean,
what date was it? 18th, 19th, I think, yeah. 19th of November, yeah.
Nobody at all said to you that there's an issue here, despite it being discussed at various committee meetings within the Development Board, despite the Head of Office of Government Procurement having all of this knowledge. Nobody saw fit to tell you or anyone in your department that
so we were told about the issue in November, and we sought a detailed note from the department, and we had a meeting, I think, a few days afterwards, and we communicated with the Minister the issue that had arisen. That was the timeline, Deputy. Would you not agree that that was a huge failure of processes? So, no, I think if they'd come to us in August, September and said, there's an issue here, it's going to cost more, we would have said, how much is it going to cost? What's happening here? That's what we would have said.
But it would have been nice to know as well, I mean, given the fact that we're in the middle of budget negotiations. Yeah,
but we would have said, well, what you'd normally ask, sorry, what's the outcome of you're doing cost reviews, what does it mean for the budget? We'd ask, that'd be the question. And they weren't in a position to answer that question, I think, until November. So just to go through the timeline then, so a report, so there's a report submitted to us on November 19th. We met the department on November 23rd. We brought this to the attention of the Minister, and we sent a formal submission to the Minister on November 26th.
Yeah, I'm on time and I don't want to eat into it.
Yeah, and if we all stick to time, some people might get a second run. So Deputy Alan Farrell, 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try not to use that. Welcome, Mr. Watt. As a comment rather than a question, I want to express my disappointment at the comments attributed to you earlier today in the media. I don't consider any of that. I don't consider a colloquial expression of that nature to be helpful, and I think it's unbecoming of a person in your office. That being said, we're here to discuss government contracts, and in particular from the committee's perspective, the National Children's Hospital. Hindsight is wonderful, of course, but from my perspective, there's two flaws with that particular project. The first being the fact that it was two-stage, and the second that there were additions and problems on site which have pushed the total value of the project or the expenditure up. And I'm not sure that any government department is equipped or was equipped with the necessary foresight to be able to determine that these problems were arising. And I think that is glaringly obvious when there are changes made to the manner in which government departments operate, in terms of the note that you've provided to us in your opening statement. So my questions, and I have 5, Chairman, that I hope to be able to get through. The two-stage tender process, I don't understand, or to a certain extent I don't accept, that there wasn't an element of foresight in terms of understanding the difference between the two-stage process in the context of the ability of the department in question to be able to obtain a competitive tender on the basis of the complexity of what was being done in the ground. You know, as somebody who briefly worked in formwork, in the formwork business, I really racked my mind as to how on earth a secondary company would be able to walk on site and say, okay, we can tender based upon what's in the ground or what was supposed to be put in the ground per the original contract. And I'm just wondering, from your experience, how it was considered appropriate, or was there any knowledge in deeper that that was the nature, or even Mr. O'Brien, was there any basis or grounding in experience to say, hang on, that can't work for the following reasons? Perhaps Mr. O'Brien or Mr. Watt.
So the two-stage process was decided upon because the detailed design wasn't developed for the project. So the plan was to do the enabling works, to start phase 1, and as the contractors are there dealing with the reality of the project, they would then finalise the design and then move to the guaranteed price. The contracts committee were told that the bill of quantities was 95% set at that stage. So it was an approximate bill of quantities, but it was very certain it was 90%. And that's really the issue, Deputy, as you've identified, that to go to a two-stage process, to commit to significant spending when there's uncertainty about the final outcome is not appropriate. But we were told that the bill of quantities was well established. So as I see it, there's an issue about how that, and I'm not going to talk about it because I wasn't involved, but it's for those who were involved to explain what happened there. But clearly it's risky for the state, and that's why we've set out that we won't have that in the future, because it doesn't seem to make sense to me.
I have to ask a question.
The element then, so the government would have been in a position to retender then when we got to the guaranteed price, and that was a decision the government had taken. Of course, the challenge is then, what type of process would you have? Would you have a real competitive process? Would it actually lead to a better outcome than the one that we're looking at now?
Can I stop you there, Mr. Watt? Any reasonable person that's planning a project, regardless of what the project is, has a concept in their mind as to what the project is going to look like, what it's going to deliver, how quickly it can be delivered, and how much money it's going to cost to deliver it. I don't understand how, given the complexities of the project, that all of those logical parts of constructing a building could be set aside, knowing what we know now, but having dispensed with logic. I never understood it from the very first day that this matter came to public light.
Yeah, like it's not the only project where we've used two-stage processes. We've used it in other projects as well, and I think we've communicated that to the committee. Yeah.
Mr. O'Brien, could you comment on my other questions, please?
Yeah, so the two-stage process is widely used. It's known typically as early contractor involvement, and it's widely used in infrastructure projects internationally. It's a development out of design and build, which is a form of contract that is, it transfers a significant degree of risk to the contractor. It has had its problems, and this process has evolved out of that approach. So the benefits of it are to get the contractor involved in the design and risk evaluation of the project at the earliest point possible, to try to uncover and work through issues that may arise on the job.
A contractor or the contractor?
Well, you tender on the basis, you openly tender the job in the normal way, but the way that you go about it is, as Secretary General has outlined, is that there is, the acknowledgement is that the design isn't fully complete because you want to get the benefit of the contractor's input into that.
How does the state obtain value for money on that basis?
Well, you're tendering the job. Everyone is given the same tender documents from the outset. And I mean...
Well, no, because we're past the tender document. At that stage you're talking...
No. You see, the key here is that the documents that were issued at the tender stage were on the basis of a fully designed basement. So the basement works that are currently underway were designed, and there's a standard contract awarded for that. There was an early engagement stage between the commencement of that work and what we call the guaranteed maximum price.
Right, okay.
So
I think a lot of that information is already in the public domain, in fairness, Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Watt, in your opening statement you said that 100% clarity will be required on tender costs. How can that possibly be achieved?
I
mean, if I think about a complex project like Metro, for instance,
so
how on earth are we going to be able to achieve that in a Metro scenario?
What we're saying is that we will only, in the future, make a decision on something when we have the detailed design set out. So in the case of the hospital, it's, all the bill of quantities for every room, for all the corridors, for all the systems and so on. So we've set out the detailed design, and that has been priced competitively in a process. And then we say, well, we've had a process, there's a detailed design. Now, within a detailed, there's always potential then for price variation, there's always potential for disputes. So if you think about a lump sum contract, traditionally, there'll be lump sum contracts, that's not the end of the matter. There'll be then disputes then, and it can get very adversarial. That's a function of how good the tender is and how good the design. If we have a very well designed project where we've gone through and spent detail, and it could spend a lot of time and a lot of money in actually developing the design, that ensures that we'd have, maybe 100% certainty is maybe, it'll be 98 to 102%. Like, it'll be that range where...
I think when you put it on the record, the Dáil, Mr. Watt, and I think if a document like that has any reference to 100%,
it's not the situation that we faced here, where in effect we are committing to something without having the final...
You're committing to more robust procedures.
What we're suggesting, and this will have implications, and this will have implications for the timeframes.
Everything.
Yeah. And this is the reality of how the procurement market works, and this is the reality of construction, how it actually works. If we are going to have certainty that when the government decides that something is going to cost, that cost is only valid and relevant when we have an absolute detailed design, which is poured over.
What you're moving towards then is effectively fixed price contracts, just calling it something else to a certain extent.
Yeah, no,
Mr. O'Brien.
That's what we have. That's what we have. That's what we have for a lot of projects. That's what we have. Like for roads projects, Deputy, as you're aware, that's what we have. we have, fixed price contracts,
But
where there can be some price variation.
The nature of the difficulties with that current project and the potential for the difficulties to arise in future projects. I mean, the largest capital project in the state is not the Children's Hospital, just to correct my colleagues. It's Metro.
It's Metro.
And it has been for years, so that clarification needs to be made. But my fear is that if we're operating as a state heretofore with certain procedures which have proven to be not without difficulty, then how on earth can the present government, can the future government, can a future Committee of Public Expenditure and Reform, Finance, Transport, or the Public Accounts Committee be certain that figures that are being put out through DEPR and or other government departments, how can they stand over them?
So other government departments.
We're being told €3 billion for that project.
But there's no an estimate for a project is what it is, an estimate. There is no certainty about the cost of anything.
And is there a time frame
until
which a fixed price contract, whatever you want to call it?
So once you've signed, like so for a road project, say whatever road project, once we have set out the design and we have the price, then we've reasonable certainty about, and that's been the history over the last 15, 20 years. So we've a reasonable idea about how much that's going to cost, and we can set that out. But my view on this is that people putting out numbers about the cost of a project without having set out the detailed design or tested the market, it's a guesstimate. It's an estimate. It's not a certain project.
I was elected to this House in 2011, and shortly thereafter, I think it was 2012, the figure for the hospital, admittedly on the Mater site, was 450 million. Hindsight, again, for the second time I will reference hindsight being wonderful. Hindsight allowed me to then go back and profile T2 in Dublin Airport, which you mentioned earlier, at a cost of 690 million, I think it was, and then with extras and fit outs and everything else, it was 960 million or something like that. We then pitched the hospital at 450 million, and I often go back and ask myself the question, how on earth did we come up with that figure based upon a project that had recently been finished, which was probably far less complex. But I'll move on, Chairman. I think my time is limited, but did the expenditure profile document provided, to the best of your recollection, not set off alarm bells?
So no, the expenditure profile for health sets out the profile, which was included in the budget, which is voted on by relevant committees, approved by the House, and then we assess the actual expenditure against that profile. So it's the actual expenditure that is the issue. Clearly, for this, the actual expenditure related to preliminary works, not the prospective spend that was to arise when the final details were established.
So what is then what then, and then obviously now you've said it. But what is the criteria for the reporting of the potential for overspend in any capital project?
So that's a matter for the sanctioning authority.
Okay.
That's a matter for the sanctioning authority.
Supposing it's your department, what do you do? What are the criteria for your department?
So I would get reports on the projects, on the progress of the projects.
Last minute.
So I would deputy get reports, but our department is small. It's not significant spending. But I would get reports, and the budget holders in my department who are responsible would report to me in terms of progress.
Okay. My last question, Chairman. Mr. Watt, there was an official within your department seconded to the Development Board of the National Children's Hospital, and we've heard repeatedly that individual didn't have any responsibility to report information.
Sorry, just say he wasn't seconded.
Sorry, he assigned?
No, he was on the board as part of...
He's just on the board. Okay, thank you for that clarity. This individual, it has been stated on many occasions that there was no responsibility for that individual to report the information that was developing to either you as his ultimate boss or indeed to government. Can you offer a comment on that? Because I'd be very interested to hear.
No, it's very clear to my mind that the correct procedures were applied, that Paul has an obligation as a member of the board. Issues arose. They were clearly understood by the chairperson, and the chairperson brought those to the relevant minister. So I'm absolutely 100% certain that Paul acted exactly as he should have done, because issues arose. He knew the chairman of the board knew about the issues. The chairman of the board had communicated that he was going to communicate them to the minister. It was very clear from the minutes that that happened. So there's absolutely no issues here in terms of how Paul discharged his duties. He discharged his duties absolutely 100%.
There's no question of you bumping into one another in Deeper for a cup of coffee and it being mentioned, or some such development.
No, but like the way it works, Deputy, is that things are written down. Like formally, when somebody has a reporting relationship, Paul had a role as part of the board. He made his views known as a member of that board, and that was very clearly communicated by the chair to the minister. And it's very clear from the minutes that you've seen that that took place. So there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that Paul discharged.
And just clarify, the public will be confused. Is it to the minister in your department or the minister?
Oh, the Minister for Health.
Yeah, say that.
As the sanctioning authority.
When you say the minister, some people mightn't be quite clear what minister.
The Minister for Health, yeah.
Okay, Deputy MacSharry.
Not the minister. Yeah.
Deputy MacSharry, we're down to 10 minutes left, so everyone can get.
Thanks very much. First of all, Secretary General, you're very welcome. Thanks very much. Just to say, I take no offence for your comments outside reported in the media earlier. As far as I'm concerned, I'm paid well enough to take a bit of grief, and frankly, so are you. So with that in mind, don't mind me being a little bit of abrupt and quick when I have only 10 minutes to get through a little bit of stuff. So can I ask you, have Deeper taken such a passive approach to other capital projects in the past? Because I know that you saw fit to mention the Cullinane Castle Baldwin bypass, which is great news for me up in Sligo. But in terms of cost, it's in the halfpenny place compared to what we really all want to speak to today, which is the elephant in the room,
I think it's misleading, Deputy, if people, the public, the taxpayer, and people who follow our debates, who think that everything goes wrong and every project.
Yes. No, I know. There's a lot of good ones.
That's the point I'm making.
Secretary General, I get it, and I think
if nobody else is going to make it, I'm going to make it. I'll repeat it, and I have a big long list which I can send
absolutely,
you.
Absolutely, and it's perfectly reasonable. Sorry, does the clerk want to speak?
Yeah, through the chair.
Sure.
You talk to me, and
everything is through the chair.
Okay. So in terms of the question,
no, you've answered it. I'm moving on. Thanks.
No, I didn't. You asked me about being
through the chair, please.
You actually, Chairman, through the chair, he did. He said he wanted to give some examples of ones that went well. I accept that. I'm moving on.
But you asked me about passive.
I've only 10 minutes.
Chair, I have to answer the questions. It'd be very wrong if I didn't answer the questions.
Yeah, put your next question and answer both together.
All right. I'll remember the first question. So, yeah, passive.
Are we finished?
Yeah, I'm waiting. Okay.
Yeah. Later today, you're going to be telling the Finance Committee, which had a different opening statement to our committee, the Department monitor actual spend events monthly expenditure profiles based on information submitted by departments to Deeper's relevant vote section, so as to keep track of aggregate spend by each department compared to planned spend. Note that Deeper does not approve expenditure at the individual project level, which I accept, but it does look at the aggregate level. Was there no indicators in terms of the aggregate spend from health over the period in the year running up to when you were formally told in mid-November to say there's something going wrong in health?
So two questions. So the second question is that the profiles relate to actual spending. So there was reports provided to us in relation to the actual expenditure undertaken in relation to preliminary works related to the Children's Hospital and the other projects, Deputy, that are the responsibility of the hospital. In relation to your first question about being passive, we're not being passive at all.
Right.
Between 2012 and the spring of 2017, and I think these emails and FOIs are all out there, there's voluminous contact between our department raising issues around governance, procedures, cost estimation of Children's Hospital, 2012.
Except the fact that we were going hundreds of millions over the top.
No, between 2012 and 2017.
Did we stop then?
During the state, no, because in 2012 a government decision was made based on the tender, which we understood was with approximate bill of quantity of 95%. So it was our understanding at the time that there was a figure for this hospital now which was higher than had been out there, but it was 980 million, and that was the figure, and that was our understanding of what was happening. So it's not fair to suggest that anyway that we're being passive. On the contrary.
Okay.
And it was our understanding, Deputy, which is fair within the Public Spending Code, that the sanctioning authority was managing the project given the government decision in the spring of 2007.
Yeah, I know you're clear in your opening statement on that, where you say you're kind of throwing the Minister and Mr. Breslin under the bus. This is their baby, like.
No.
This is their baby, it's not my baby.
Wait, hang on a second.
We give the money.
Through the chair. Don't answer forward and back.
No, I'm talking to you. I'm just looking at him. That's all.
We're not in the business of throwing people under buses.
No.
We're in the business of trying to do the best for the taxpayer.
No, I agree with you. Same as us. It's just that you have that one piece of the whole statement in bold.
And what we're trying to do, is learn the lessons. And we set out now a variety of reforms to ensure that we improve them. I'm very interested in hearing any suggestions.
And that's all I have. Well,
other suggestions you might make.
One very good suggestion. Okay, don't go to tender anymore unless you have an absolutely detailed design. To me, that's tendering 101, and all I build is a house. So there's one little bit of advice. Can I continue? Can I continue?
It's an observation.
Can I continue?
No, fair enough.
Well, you invited advice. I threw in my Tuppence worth from an ordinary 5-8. No, you're right. It's much more complex.
Can I just make a point here?
So it's much more complex. Why wouldn't you get the detailed design first?
Sorry, you're
to the chair.
Sorry, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to you, Chairman.
Deputy MacSharry, put your question.
Okay. So that point is made. That's an observation. Can I ask, Mr. Quinn, as head of the OGP, reports to you, isn't that right? How often would you meet in that function? Is there scheduled meetings, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly?
So we would meet every Monday.
Okay, every Monday. That's fine. That's all I need to know.
11 o'clock.
That's all I need to know on that. So can I just put to you that it's not credible that in 52 Mondays a year, or 52 meetings a year, let's take off 2 or 3 for holidays.
I would take more than 2 or 3 holidays.
Okay, well, let's take 10 off. So let's say 42 meetings a year. I don't believe it credible that Mr. Quinn would not share with you the fact, listen, just to let you know what's going on down the road. We're overshooting here. And I just think a man of your experience, well, all those excellent projects that have worked out so well, that you rightly put on record and you're entitled, and I support you doing so, it is not remotely credible that the biggest, as in at the moment anyway, 1.7 billion or whatever it's going to be, that he did not fill you in. So grand it's not in minutes, and grand we follow the correct procedure. But I'm putting it to you, it's not credible. I know I'm probably rushing on time, and I have 2 very important points I do want to get to, because I know we're all only going to get one bite of the cherry. We were given a note from the Department of Health from our earlier meeting. They provided it to us on the 31st of January. And it provides a footnote. It's very much kind of stated at the moment now we're heading for 1.7 billion. That's what it looks like, and we have PwC helping us, and you laid out a whole series of improvements for the next projects. But we're still faced with the public having to pay the bills for this one. Yep. And there's a footnote that says exclusions include changes in scope, excess national construction tender inflation above 4% post-July 2019. Okay? Changes in legislation, VAT, PRSI, statutory labour rates and building regulations. But let's focus on the construction tender inflation, because I am conscious that this was subject of a prime-time programme the other night, but it was in a footnote of a document given to us in January. According to ACOM's Ireland annual review, and also the Institute of Chartered Surveyors in Ireland, in terms of last year's performance and next year's projected performance, construction tender inflation has run at 7.5% on average over the last year, and is likely to be no less than 7% in the year ahead. Doesn't that in effect mean that BAM, provided construction inflation exceeds that 4% that's obviously budgeted for in the contract, or that this briefing document would suggest, that once that construction inflation performs at broadly the same as last year, it's open season again on negotiations?
Is that a question? No.
Yeah.
No is the answer.
So what does it mean then?
So what it means, if I understand, and I'm not, to say this again, Chair, as you know.
Well, maybe the head of contracts might know.
And well, that's the question, but it's not for David either. Like, there's a board, which is the sponsoring agency. There's an authority very clear that has responsibility for this. As I understand it, and I don't recall the document that you're referring to, if inflation is above a certain level, well, that has implications for, I understand, for the cost, and I think that's been set out clearly.
Yes, But what I'm asking is, because it says exclusions include, this is a Department of Health briefing document.
Yeah.
Now, again, I only have, I suppose, a basic understanding of language and certainly none of value engineering. But to me, reading English, this says to me that if construction inflation goes over 4%, when it's performing at 7.5% last year and projected according to AECOM's Ireland Annual Review looking ahead for 2019, that it's likely to be at 7%. 7 minus 4 equals 3. Can we look forward to the fact that BAM are going to be able to invoke the exclusion mentioned here of it having succeeded 4%, and therefore it's open season again, and really 1.7 billion was the accurate price then. But now we have to negotiate because inflation has exceeded the 4% provided for.
Mr. O'Brien, would that be the normal procedure?
That's the contract says.
That is the contract.
Would that be
okay. So that we're absolutely clear for the people watching at home. For all of our organisation oversight and reviews, nobody knows what the price is going to be. Because already, provided construction inflation performs broadly in line with profile of experts like AECOM and the Institute of Chartered Surveyors in Ireland, you can chuck it down. BAM are going to be in a position to renegotiate aspects of price because of construction inflation. So 1.7 billion may as well have said 900 million, because it's going to be more. And it's going to be likely to be significantly more. And I'd like to know, in terms of the contract, and I think the public are entitled to know, is it an annual construction tender inflation rate, or is it a Dublin-based one? Because again, these self-same expert groups suggest that Dublin could be performing up closer to 10 and 12% in terms of tender inflation, whereas nationally we might average about 7 or 7.5. Either way, the public to this day, for all the facts that we provided with, are being sold a pup because nobody knows, least of all your good self, because of this. I have one final question. Can you confirm that my understanding is correct?
Mr. O'Brien, would you, in your knowledge of government contracts,
I think it's a yes or a no.
The contract is the contract.
I haven't seen the contract, you see. You possibly have. I
haven't seen it either.
Okay.
But if inflation turns out more,
the price goes up,
that has implications. That's what the contract says.
and the figures to be calculated.
So that's what the contract
and it's
says.
written into the contract.
That's what the contract says.
And the question is the inflation rate generally the Dublin construction inflation rate, or is national? To clarify that point.
Sorry, I can only comment on the basis of the standard public works contract. The contract for the hospital, you'd have to raise that issue with them as to what the exact provisions in that contract are.
Generally.
In our contracts, they're fixed price for a period of 30 to 36 months, depending on which price variation clause you're using.
Yeah.
So at the end of that period, and this would be the case in a project of long duration, such as the hospital, at that point there is an entitlement to recover. That's the case in most construction contracts.
I'm not asking, is it a case in most?
Well, that's all I can comment on.
You know, it may well be standard operating procedure for building a road, and we know about all the successes. But the public are being led to believe, and certainly I was until I researched for this meeting, and I saw prime time the other night, was under the uninformed impression that, look, 1.7 billion, as ridiculously high as that sounds, is likely not to be remotely that price. And if construction inflation continues, we can expect an increase of in and around 3.5% per year if levels remain at the same, though much of these reports suggest they are going to increase.
Okay. Deputy, just want to be clear. No, I'm not.
I have my last one then.
Last question.
Yeah, I have my last one. Okay, we've established that. I'll just load these together, but the very first preliminary to line this up is to the CNAG. CNAG, can I ask, is it within the competence of the Department of Public Expenditure or the Taoiseach or indeed this committee to have asked you to undertake a review such as that being undertaken by PwC with regard to this project?
I'm Do you mean, is it their prerogative to require me to do it, or
No,
to
I'm
ask
just
me?
asking, if they asked you, is it within their remit to choose to, if they wish?
Certainly, anybody can ask me to.
Okay, and if they did that...
But it's my decision
I know it's your
as to
decision,
whether I do it or not.
And can I ask, if you were asked to do that, would there be a significant, and no doubt you've seen the terms of reference of the PwC review, if you were asked to do that, would you have had to procure significant additional resources to complete it?
I might have to. I mean, certainly if there are technical issues in relation to quantity surveying.
Do you think the cost that if your office were asked to do that, and if you had to procure some expertise to do that, do you think that you'd manage to undertake to do that, given that your office is above reproach with no commercial relationship with anyone on the planet? Do you think you could do that for any less than €450 million?
I presume you mean 450,000.
450, sorry.
I could do it for less than 450 million.
Yeah, sorry.
But
sorry, 450,000.
I wouldn't like to.
No, I appreciate you wouldn't. I'm just wondering, do you think you could?
I really, it's a matter that's complete
can I ask Mr. Watt then, when we're considering reviews like this, why do we always go to the top 4 or 5 companies within the 2 canals when we have the expertise that's above reproach in-house that maybe at a minimum be able to do it as cheap? But one thing we're certain of is the CNAG's office has no commercial relationship with anybody, and the public can have absolute confidence in the outcome. Secondly, can I ask, in choosing PwC, was there a tender process? Thank you.
And just clarify that bit about PwC, were they on the list?
Nothing to do with me.
Just health.
Nothing to do with me.
Health.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's who is it to do it?
Can I just...
Who is it to do it?
No,
this Department of Health...
Yeah.
The Department of
Health. It was the HSE.
Or the HSE, so it's clearly not my department. So
Well, I'm asking for your advice, given your substantial experience.
you're not asking for my advice.
I am.
You're asking me about a review into an issue
And I'm just saying...
which was commissioned by another entity, and you're asking
what do
me...
you think? You know,
You're not asking me what I think.
you're the Secretary General in
asking me
control of the
that
biggest budget in the state. Surely you have some
Chairman,
expertise to give a
Through the
professional
chair.
view.
Through the chair.
Chairman, I've been here now.
Yeah.
I was invited in this committee.
Yeah. And you were
committee-
dragged kicking and screaming in for a few
No,
hours.
Deputy, there's no one dragged. He was invited and
You know,
he's here.
that's the reality.
Chairman.
And I want to say to Mr. Watt, just listen, that comment is not a comment of the committee. It might
Just
be
like the
comment of
mob one outside the room.
No, it's not
We're
a
all
comment
big
of-
boys. I'm paid well
I'm
enough to
now
take a bit of
moving-
grief,
I'm now-
as is the Secretary
sorry.
General.
I'm chairing this meeting and I'm moving on. It's clear...
Can he answer those questions first?
Sorry, I'm chairing the
I
meeting.
know, but you could get the answers.
I am chairing the meeting, and it's clear that your department, or you had no role in relation to commissioning that cost review process. Am I correct, yes or no?
You're correct,
That's answered
Chair.
that. Secondly, in relation to the inflation issue, Mr. O'Brien answered in general about contracts under your organisation, but because you gave a derogation, this contract doesn't come under your chairmanship. Is that correct? So the people we have to address that question about the extra inflation, and it's obvious there will be increases, will be to the hospital board and those people when they're back here again in the coming weeks. Next speaker is Alan Kelly, 10 minutes.
Thanks. I have 4 questions, Secretary General and your colleagues. My questions relate to the estimates process, the functionality of the department, communications between government departments and Circular 1210. They're my 4 topics, just to let you know in advance. And hopefully I'll be able to get through the 4 questions. Under the Constitution, under Article 28(4.4), the Government shall prepare estimates of the receipts and estimates of the expenditure of the State for each financial year and shall present them to Dáil Éireann for consideration. And then under Article 17(1)(1) of the Constitution says Dáil Éireann shall consider such estimates. I can't get my head around the estimates process that we've just gone through late last year and revised early this year, because with a situation where estimates were given last October on budget day on the 9th of October, revised estimates on the 19th of December, and there was an awareness within the department of a massive overrun in the hospital, Children's Hospital. But yet the Constitution is very clear. it has to be, the government shall prepare estimates of receipts and estimates of the expenditure of the state for each financial year, and they have to be done truthfully. So, how can we say that the estimates that were done last October were done accurately and to the best of the ability of the department? And then how can we say that the book of revised estimates on the 19th of December were as well? Because in the Dáil on the 20th of February, when there was further revised estimates, the Taoiseach actually tacitly said that they had to be reprofiled. But there was an awareness within the department of the issues relating to the hospital by an assistant secretary, in effect, for some period of time, and there was an awareness, as you've outlined, on the 19th of November of your department of the huge overrun. So, were inaccurate estimates given to the Dáil last October, subsequently last December?
The estimates are prepared on budget day. There's a summary estimate set out by the Minister on budget night. There are changes that are made then. This year there are very modest changes. There are always technical issues as end-year positions become clearer. And then we set out, Deputy, as you said, as the revised estimates, and those revised were set out. The implications for the Children's Hospital and what it meant for the allocations of departments, those matters weren't decided upon by government in sufficient time for us, because the government was debating, to recast the estimates. And therefore the estimates were published, because we're anxious always to publish now before the end of the year. We don't publish them in 2019. We don't think it's appropriate to publish the estimates when the year has already begun, and we now endeavour to publish them before the end of the year. So a decision was taken that we would publish the estimates. As the Deputy will be aware from his time in government, this is not unusual. It's not unusual for government to publish estimates, its revised estimates, at a time when there are issues outstanding which the government may know might require a revision subsequently. And there are cases, and I won't go through them, when you were a minister, when the same thing happened. So this is not unusual, and I'm absolutely confident that the estimate that was prepared was accurate. The amount of money is 100 million, if I understand the implications for the health estimate of the projected.
I understand.
It's 100 million. That's 100 million out of a capital budget of 7.5 billion for this year, and out of overall exchequer spending.
I understand. I'm sorry for interrupting. It's just I'm stuck on time.
Well, I'm answering the question. And then overall general government spending of almost 80 billion. So that 100, so 800 million is 1%. So it's less than 0.1% of the amount. Adjustments were made, great adjustments for that in previous periods.
Okay, anyway. Thank you.
No problem.
Sorry for the engagement, but I know you've answered the questions, but I have short time, so I'd appreciate it if we could keep the answers short, if possible. So 100 million is not Mickey Mouse money. I know in the scale of what you presented there, it's a fraction. But it's not Mickey Mouse money.
I wouldn't use a term like that.
Oh, I know, but I'm just saying, as regards the scale of this issue, it might be a fraction of the total spend, as you outlined, but it's 100 million. And the estimates that were revised in December, there was a full awareness in the department of that, which now we've all had to come in and do. There was, you've told us, November. We've had to come in and do revised estimates. Pretty embarrassing thing, actually, for the government over the last number of weeks when they had to do it.
I think so.
But inside in the MAC meetings, where a member of the board was sitting on, where you've admitted that you met 40-something times a year, there was an awareness of this. And it stretches credibility. In fact, it's not credible. It's not credible, in my eyes, and in most people's eyes, I believe, to say that there was Chinese walls and there was no awareness given to you or the Minister of anything to do with any overspend. If that is accurate, which is what has been said, then there's an issue of dysfunctionality somewhere here. And I want to ask a couple of questions related to that. I've gone through all the emails from the Department to Department of Health to the Department of Public Expenditure. Why did it take so long for the two departments to meet to discuss the Children's Hospital. And I don't know these people, so it's not I'm only referencing them to show that who was communicating. There's a David Maloney to Fiona Duffy in the Department of Health, where on the 20th of November, he's saying that Jim Breslin made him aware of some issues relating to the department or in relation to issues in Children's Hospital in the budgetary process in October, but this is the first documentation that they have been provided with. In fairness, you said that earlier on. Well, what doesn't add up to me is you said you found out on the 19th, but your minister found out on the 9th.
No, I said we got a documentation on the 19th.
No, you said you were made aware. You answered specifically the question. We can go back. One second. You answered the question. You said you were made aware on the 19th. But your minister in another committee has said he found out on the 9th. So did it take 10 days for the minister to tell you?
No. So what I said was a report was submitted by the Department of Health on the 19th of November. And that we met the Department of Health on the 23rd, and a formal submission setting out the outcome of the meeting was sent to the Minister on the 26th of November. There was a meeting, which I think the Minister was at, where it was mentioned there was an issue, and he alerted, we understood then there was an issue, and then we asked for a detailed note on it. Because
actually,
it's no good, Deputy, saying there's a problem with something.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
Write it down. Like,
but just to be fair now, what you said to Deputy Jonathan O'Brien earlier on was you were first made aware of it on the 19th.
In written form, yeah.
Well, now you're after adding on to that. So on November the 9th, the Minister was made aware of it. You were made aware. So when were you first made aware of an issue? I'm not. I mean, it's just a simple question. I'm entitled to ask it. Like, you were first made aware in written form on the 19th. Now, when were you first? Let me ask the question first. When were you first made aware of an issue orally?
So I think that the meeting with the 9th, when the Minister was told, the Minister would have told me afterwards about the issue.
That's new information. Just to let you know, we've never heard this before.
About what?
What's the disdain for? I'm only asking a question.
Like, I really find this absolutely pointless. We have made it very clear, the position, and I just don't quite understand why. What is the issue? So
I've asked you about the estimates process.
Yeah, and I've explained to you the estimates process.
I want to know when there was an awareness within the department, because an estimates process was gone through here, and if there was an awareness in the department, why it wasn't flagged as part of the estimates process.
So I've explained.
And that's why I want to know when you knew. And with respect, I'm entitled to ask that question.
I received a written report. We received a written report on the 19th of November.
And you were first made aware of it on the 9th?
No, yes. The Minister was told earlier, and we had a conversation then about that there was an issue.
On the 9th?
That's what the Minister said. That's the date.
There was an email from Tracy to David on the 20th of the 11th. And this is... I'll read it into the record purely because to follow my questioning you'll need to hear it. David, we have been seeking, and Tracy is from the Assistant Secretary of Acute Hospitals Policy Division's Department of Health. We've been seeking to meet your division, I don't know David by the way, on this issue since the end of September. This is the 20th of November. Fionnuala's discussion with Barry O'Brien on 27th of September and follow-up voicemails and emails requesting a meeting on 17th of October, 24th of October and 15th of November. I would appreciate if you could revert to the time. Why in the name of God is it taking so long? Given the scale of this issue, given the fact now that the Minister for Health is aware of it since the end of August, early September, right? That your Minister was aware of it, now we know on November the 9th, that Jim Breslin in October had made reference to it during budget negotiations, and that's acknowledged by an official in your department, that there's an issue here. Why did it take so long for officials in two departments to actually sit down and have a meeting?
So they have many meetings about many matters. Like, during the budget process, there will be 30+ meetings between officials in our department and health about matters related to the budget. David and his team asked for a detailed note on what the position was and that we'd engage with them when we had the facts, that the facts were not established I think it's very reasonable to ask on any issue that to set out, please, what are the facts, and then when we have the facts, we will sit and meet, and then we'll act.
To be fair to the Department of Health, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, they were trying to talk to you. I mean, this is a document released to us. 27th of September, 17th of October, 24th of October, 15th of November.
So when we received the paper from the Department of Health, 4 days later we met them. Seems timely enough.
It seems timely enough. So the Secretary-General of the Department of Health flagged this during budgetary negotiations. It's referenced by an official in the department. They've made numerous attempts. In fairness, the Minister actually made reference to this during a committee hearing of health. And you feel that it's timely enough that on the 21st of November...
No, that's not what I said. I said on the 19th of November, we met 4 days afterwards, and that's timely to meet somebody 4 days after they have sent you a paper to discuss the paper they've sent you. That's what I said.
But in hindsight, do you think it would have been a good idea to sit down with the Department of Health and accept and their request?
I think it's a good idea to sit down with the Department of Health when they had prepared a piece of paper setting out the position with respect to the project.
Well, they certainly had enough documentation to have a discussion with yourselves already at that period of time. We've seen all the documentation. We've seen the letters that came through the board. We've seen the board minutes. They certainly had enough to go through a discussion with yourselves. The fact that there was no meeting for me is bewildering. Last question.
On time, yeah.
Yeah, last question. So, I don't find the answer satisfactory, I have to be honest. Just put that in the record. The estimates process for me is just bewildering that there was meetings, MAC meetings taking place. There was an official there, and nobody said nothing. Revised estimates again is, and the fact that there was a lack of capacity to even have a meeting between two departments, and now an awareness level of the 9th of November instead of the 19th of November. I want to ask you about Circular 122010, which is the protocol for civil servants nominated to the boards of non-commercial state bodies. We don't need to go through the steps, if that's all right, of what's in this. It's basically incorporated into how state bodies should perform. But in it, it's quite clear as to what anybody who is a state official serving on the board has to do as regards bringing awareness to the minister. And I note the footnote 1, the relevant minister is the minister under whose aegis the body falls. So, occasions when information must be conveyed directly to the relevant minister without delay. The minister must be notified without delay where there is a serious weakness in controls that has been addressed despite being drawn to the attention of the board or the chairman. Number 2, there is significant strategic or reputational risk to the body that has not been addressed. We can hardly say now that there hasn't been reputational issues relating to the National Children's Hospital. So, given the fact that we know now that there was a massive overspend in the summer of 2018, and we've seen the board minutes, would it not have been reasonable, and you're the person, I suppose, who governs this circular, would it not have been reasonable for the person who was on the board to go directly to the minister in relation to this overspend? And the second part of that question, which is my final question, given the time, do you not have concerns that, given the way in which this circular has been interpreted in this instance, that there could be issues relating to other state boards and how civil servants or state employees adhere to this circular on those boards, given how it was interpreted for this on this occasion?
Mr. Watt.
So I've addressed this, Chair, already, this question earlier in respect of Deputy Farrell.
Well, actually, the second part of it you certainly haven't.
But I did address the first. I did address the question already. So it says here if there's serious weaknesses that have not been addressed, despite being so, the matters are brought clearly to the attention of the chairperson, and the chairperson brought those matters to the attention of the Minister for Health. It's absolutely crystal clear that Paul Quinn and his colleagues acted exactly in line with the circulars, and I hope, Deputy, you accept that.
I'm just asking your opinion.
But
my second part of the question, are you happy, it's nothing to do with the Children's Hospital, are you happy that there might be a need to actually look at how this circular has been interpreted across other. Or have you done an audit, or restated it?
I've no reason to believe there's any issues with the circular. Okay. What I do know, though, Deputy, is we'll never get a civil servant to sit on a board again in this capacity, ever.
Okay.
Okay.
Just for the record.
We'll see.
For the record, we won't.
Deputy
okay. For the record.
Mr. Watt, you're very welcome, and your team are very welcome. I think it's most unacceptable that you refer to the committee as a mob. If you didn't, and that's been reported, perhaps you'll confirm that you're going to ask the reporter to withdraw that because it's not accurate.
So, I've already addressed this.
No, sorry. I'm asking a question.
I really feel
no,
this.
Mr. Watt, sorry. As a member, I've a lot of questions I want to ask. To refer to the committee as a mob, if it's not correct, will you be issuing instructions for that to be changed? Or is it that you said it and you're apologising?
So I will talk to the journalist. I don't know who the journalist was. I don't know who, but I will speak with the journalist when I get a chance.
Did you hear my question, Mr. Watt? Will you be talking to the journalist to say that was wrong and you didn't say that, or will you? Are you apologising for saying it?
So I said already, through the chair, that if I said it, that I apologise for that, and that wasn't meant to be offensive in any way.
It is offensive to call a committee a mob. Níl sé ceart ná cór agus ní féidir glacu leis an focail gramasca úsáid maidiú leis an coiste seo. I'm not sure now. I'm not sure what your body language means, but I am here as a member to ask questions in the most polite manner possible and to get replies.
And I've answered questions, Deputy,
as
I have on many occasions.
I'm asking this question now, Mr. Watt. I'm asking this question now, and I'm still not sure what you're saying. Did you use the word mob, or did you not? I don't
have any recollection of what I said.
Okay.
That's my answer.
Well, let me put my questions in perspective on this. See, I'm from Galway City, and I welcome the plan. And I welcome what's in the plan in relation to Galway to a certain point. And it's actually very good in terms of the language used, which is what we're going to come back to. Developing and implementing a comprehensive and strategic metropolitan area spatial plan to enable it and transformation and sustainable and so on. I welcome all that lovely language, and language is awfully important. And so what we're here on is about governance, isn't that right? For me, this is about governance, and that proper procedures are in place to ensure value for public money. Isn't that right, Mr. Watt?
We're here about governance and value.
Am I distracting you from something more important? No?
Governance are the key questions,
Good, great.
Governance and procedures and such.
Lovely. So, in relation to your opening today, and go back on that then. Back in 2015, the new hospital board appeared before this committee prior to my time because of the issues that had arisen before that in relation to the original project. The new board appeared before this committee, and absolute assurances were given to this committee that governance was in place and no issues would arise. They had learned. The way that you're telling us today you've learned in your opening statement, they had learned as well. Did you look at that? No. You did. Well, I did. I took the precaution of reading that and looking at what they said, and then I followed up in relation to what the department was to do. They were produced a report on what had been learned. But such was the debacle before that, and perhaps the Controller and Auditor General might just give us the figure that was written off in relation to the previous hospital site.
Just from memory, around 36 million.
So that was written off, Mr. Watt, 35 million. I don't expect you to go back there, but what I do expect you is to be familiar with that and to know what you learned from that. And so we go forward with a board that gave us assurances, and the board were picked for their expertise. Isn't that right, Mr. Watt? Okay. So again, for today, I went through, and I'm sorry that Mr. Quinn isn't here, but that was your decision. I went through the minutes of this in relation to it, and it's actually some of the comments, and the minutes are minutes, But some of the comments in relation to, let me just be very specific, lack of cooperation of all parties on the 4th of July 2018 is being noted in this, and the guaranteed maximum price hasn't been agreed. It's an ongoing concern from earlier in the year, so nobody knows what the guaranteed maximum price is, and as the months go on and the minutes go on, they keep recording this, and at some stage they get in an expert. Now, Mr. Watt, this is under a procedure that ye allowed a two-stage process, which if I have time I'll come back to. So, board is alerted to high risk in July 18. August, guaranteed maximum price still not done. Now listen to this one. Listen to this, Mr. Watt, when you're ready. Okay? Plan B has been discussed, and it's noted that the board noted the performance of BAM to date during the Phase 1 fell far short of what would be expected of a Tier 1 contractor. Noted minutes. Now, I highlighted these and looked at them, and I thought, what is this board doing and what is this contractor doing? I'm making no comment. I'm asking a question, and we go forward to October, and we notice the board remarked that BAM had not delivered and questioned whether various design and contractor teams are fit for purpose to deliver a project of this scale and complexity. Will I repeat it, or have you got it? The board are noting had not delivered and questioned whether the design and contractor teams. This is October.
These are the board minutes of the National Children's
National Paediatric Hospital Development Board.
I'm not
no, that's okay.
Member of the board.
No, I understand that. I understand that. I highlight that to show you questions are being raised by the board about their own design team and their own teams that have been procured under the new government's model at great cost and because of their expertise. Private people brought in because of their expertise. And so there are issues all of the time in relation to this new model. And then we go forward to what Deputy Kelly has gone into in the emails. And it looks like they were writing to you even earlier, Mr. Watt. So on the 17th of October, and again, the name is not of interest to me, but it's to the government, that's your office, I presume, Barry O'Brien at per.government.ie. Yeah. So on the 17th of October, you're getting an email. We spoke briefly a couple of weeks ago when I said we want to brief you on the current position and so on. That's the 17th of October, referring back. And potential cost issues emerging relating to the guaranteed maximum price. You were clearly on notice on the 17th of October, and they were referring to a meeting before that, isn't that right? Sorry, am I not making that question clearer?
So
deeper you're talking.
So there were contacts between the Department of Health, and there was an attempt to establish a meeting.
And so following up on what Deputy Kelly has asked, why didn't the meeting take place? I'm back now at 17th of October. His time ran out before he could go back to that date. So if we had more time...
there are many meetings took place between the Department of Health and DEPR during that period.
The meeting took place in November, on the 19th or 21st, you said, when you got the documentation. So this shows that the Department of Health, or whoever it was, Health Executive Department of Health, was desperately trying to contact your office, say there were issues here in relation to costs. No?
There were issues. There were officers deal with the Department of Health on many issues, particularly that time of the year when they're discussing the estimates.
Mr. Watt, did you hear my question?
Yeah.
Am I painting this wrong when I say that the Health Department were desperately trying to contact your office, referring to talking to, not you, but the office a few weeks ago, in relation to issues arising in relation to costs? Is that correct?
Yeah. So they were trying, and the officers said, to please set out the position.
They did eventually.
And then we will have a conversation when the position is set out, which is not
unreasonable. And in one of those emails, then it's noted that there were governance issues on the 20th of November, and from David. Thank you for the material. As you know, in the past, we voiced serious concerns in relation to the governance of the Children's Hospital project, and were assured that arrangements in place were sufficiently robust. And so you're highlighting the fact that you did have concerns about governance. And so when they contacted you then and they were desperately trying to about money, did the alarm bells not ring with you? Did something not go off to say, let's sit down, let's see what's going on here? They're actually contacting us.
So
And not so now, just did alarm bells go off?
So when the issue was raised with us about problems with the guaranteed maximum price, we asked the Department of Health for a detailed assessment of where we were.
Eventually. I saw
and
that.
when that assessment came in, officials in my department sat down and discussed it, and the Minister was informed.
Okay, I heard that. I heard it about 4 times. I leave it for now. That's your answer. I've shown that there was previous contact. In relation to your opening statement, and Mr O'Brien as well, do I take it that the two-stage process is now gone? Is that a decision by you, or did I misread your opening statement?
Obviously, what has arisen in the Children's Hospital Deputy raises significant concerns about the two-stage process, and certainly a two-stage process which involves committing us to significant spending on preliminary works in the absence of. So that we obviously will not support that type of process again. Unless there's modest spending on preliminary works and also much more certainty around.
I welcome those changes and I welcome what you're saying. My difficulty with this, throughout all of this documentation, which unfortunately I've read, there's a constant reassurance given that the two-stage process was the way to go.
Yep.
It avoided confrontation, it avoided litigation, it avoided extra costs, and here we are today. Yep. Actually, your note, one of the notes from your department says a 2 billion. Are we now looking at a 2 billion project? That's to quote from your own emails. So your two-stage process, which was allowed, did none of those things. It did none of those things. It didn't avoid litigation, did it?
At the time, the view was by the National Children's Board, which they debated and brought to the Contest Committee, was that if we had done a lump sum contract, that it would have taken many more years to get the detailed design. And given the nature of this project, the complexity of this project, that would have been very difficult to get people to bid for the project. In a traditional lump sum contract, because of the risk would have been too great. And that was so. Deputy, clearly it didn't work out as they expected.
Clearly it didn't work out, and it went from something like 650 million. Just Mr. Watt, just 1 second.
But just to say, there's no certainty that a different procurement contract or process would have led to a different price. So there's no certainty about that.
This is the difficulty, that we can get no reassurances from you today, despite your 18-page document, to know that if another children's hospital was built tomorrow, that it wouldn't go from 650 million or whatever the original figure was to 2 billion, which this is, are we looking at a project of 2 billion, quote unquote, from your email. So that's my difficulty. Just in your, finally, am I running out of time? The opening statement.
You're gone 1 or 2 minutes.
Just, you mentioned a few reviews underway in your 18-page statement, and again, it is noteworthy that you don't mention the Children's Hospital and actually itemise what has been learned by your department and how governance needs to be improved from ye in relation to circulars. So my 2 specific questions is, you talk about a review. We are reviewing Ireland's capital management systems. Who is that? The department, your department? When did it start? Did it start? When is it going to be completed, please?
So in effect,
there's one more. I beg your pardon. There's one more as well, where you've committed to other changes.
So.
Sorry, it's on page 15. My department will conduct a full assessment of how cost estimation. So there's 2 promises. Have they started? When will they be completed?
So a number of the reviews have started. In terms of the cost estimation, we're now looking at, can we put in place some additional peer review process?
Now, look at page 15 of your opening statement and just tell me, my department will conduct a full assessment of how cost estimation could be improved. When is that going to start?
Yeah, so that is starting now.
Today? So
it's ongoing. So the review of...
Mr. Watt, when did that start? Will conduct.
It's starting. It's ongoing. So we're looking at all the different elements I've set out here.
Mr. Watt, just 1 second. Will conduct a full assessment. Does that mean it has started?
That means it's ongoing.
When did it start?
So it started the last number of weeks. So we've been setting out over the last 2 months And this work has been ongoing already, a series of reforms, and I've listed some of the reforms here today.
Mr. Watt, do you know what would be helpful in your 18-page statement? And even now, and the Chair is looking at me, so I'll stop in fairness to the others. When it started, when it will be completed, when it will be available, that would help to give reassurance. Thanks.
We'll ask you to send that to this committee in relation to that. You can send that on in writing to the committee. I'm taking a break for 5 minutes just to give people an opportunity to want to draw their breath. 5 minutes suspension. Okay? We're now suspended for 5 minutes only. Okay, Bobby. In public session. And before I call the next speaker, which is Catherine Murphy, as chairman of this committee, I have a duty to make the following clear. And I'm reading from the invitation that this committee approved and agreed and was issued to Mr. Robert Watt. And it reads as follows. I wish to confirm that the committee requests your attendance at a meeting to discuss the department's historical and continuing role in the oversight and implementation of projects under the National Framework for Capital Investment and under the National Development Plan 2018-2027, as specified in your department's published annual business plan. The committee would particularly like to focus on the department's role in ensuring that value for money is achieved through systematic appraisal and professional management of all capital projects. Now, in light of that letter, as chairman of the committee, back a number of days ago, we wrote to the department asking them to list approximately the 10 major projects that fall under this issue. And we got the list. And the list starts off with Metrolink, then it goes on to the National Children's Hospital. It deals with the water supply project Eastern and Midlands region, and that's Irish Water, the N20 Cork to Limerick, the Galway City Ring Road, the PPP M11 project Gorey to Enniscorthy, the Greater Dublin Area Drainage Scheme under Irish Water, the N21 to N69, which is Limerick to Adair to Fines, the PPP N25, which is the New Ross Bypass, and the National Broadband Plan. We're here for over 2 hours, and I am concerned as chairman that we haven't been sticking to the subject matter of the invitation. We have spent most of our time dealing with an item, the Children's Hospital. And I have to make sure that this meeting is run in a balanced and fair way to the members and to the witnesses who were called to discuss the National Capital Plan, not solely one item. And I'm saying as chairman, I have a duty as chairman to ensure the discussion here aligns itself with the invitation. The invitation didn't reference the National Children's Hospital specifically. Yes, we can mention it, but I am saying as chairman, I'm going to ensure that for the remainder of the meeting that the discussion aligns itself with the invitation. And I hope I'm making myself clear. Yes, there can be some further comments on the National Children's Hospital. Pardon? Yeah, no, I'm just
one
saying.
Of the capital projects, Chair.
Pardon?
One of the substantial capital projects under Project 2040, under the remit of the accounting officer. So, any question that is put in relation to National Children's Hospital is a legitimate.
It is a legitimate.
And members should not be limited in putting their questions.
No, what I am saying, and I hope people are listening, I have said the National Children's Hospital is item 2 on that.
Yes.
But I just want to make sure that the meeting fairly reflects the invitation that was issued, which is broader than one topic. And at the end of it, I don't want any reasonable observer to say we had a meeting solely on the National Children's Hospital. Yes, it's a key element, but it is not the specific.
Most want to dwell on that one and
fine,
ask the question.
I am making it clear. Well then, I'm just saying the committee should have chosen to issue a different invitation if that was the intention of the committee.
But interrupt every member to pick out the projects.
No, you're within, you're right, but I have to
Chair, you're right. Sorry, just on a point of order, Chair, you're entitled to point that out.
Yeah, and that's all I'm doing.
But, sorry, Chair, but the thread of governance goes through all of the projects. And if the governance from one project leads us to have serious questions, it has implications from all the projects.
Yes.
Let's be a little bit realistic here in relation to that. We're here to reassure ourselves about value for money on all projects. On all projects. And if one stands out as questionable and on governance issues, that we're looking for reassurance in not just words, in actual written form, how that won't happen with other projects. And so there is That's number one. Number two, a comment was made about a mob. So therefore, that took 2 minutes or 3 minutes of people's speaking time to clarify that as well. So let's just put it in a realistic framework. I support you totally in relation to what should be discussed at the meeting. It has to be done within a realistic framework.
Yeah. And I've said the National Children's Hospital is on the list. It is within the remit of this meeting. But I'm just saying, as Chairman, I want to achieve a balance. And this meeting has to be looked at in its totality when the meeting comes out.
Fair enough.
Next speaker is Deputy Murphy.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's important that, and you're very welcome, and I think it's important that we have respect for each other in terms of both witnesses and members. And I really feel that the comment did, and I don't want to labour the point, didn't get this meeting off to a good start. And I think it was utterly inappropriate, and you have apologised. I just want to commence by just referring to your opening statement, page 9, where you talk about the public spending code and looking to achieve value for money, and then you then go down to the next paragraph when you said the public spending code sets out the oversight and approval process for public expenditure proposals, including capital projects. Governance and clear lines of responsibility are key to successful public capital investment, and of course they are. Now, the list that you gave us in terms of the projects, a lot of them are transport are roads projects, and the lead authority would be, for example, the National Roads Authority, who have a great deal of expertise at this stage, and my constituency, for example, would have more motorway running through it than any other, Kildare, than any other county. N7, N9, N4, and it's the lead authority on many things. So there has been a great deal of experience in those projects, and essentially they do stay on budget and they do stay on target. It's the bespoke ones that the real problem is with. We can't really go into the National Broadband Plan because, and there has been a lot talked about that in relation to the procurement process. We can't really go into Metrolink because it's a current one, and the one that is the standout one, that is the bespoke one, where there's a degree of experience, where we can see if there are institutional gaps, is the National Children's Hospital. Now, can I ask Mr. O'Brien, you head up the committee or the section that deals with capital projects. Can I ask you what your own background is, please?
I'm an architect. I suppose I have about 20 years experience in project delivery and housing, commercial and so on.
And is that in the private sector? Is it
a mix? Laterally in social housing and.
Right. Okay. So you'd be well, appraised in terms of tendering and all of the rest of it. Yeah. It was. I didn't have to go to do a bit of research in Harvard or Yale or Cambridge or Oxford. I just had a look at DIT in terms of an outline of what can go wrong where there's serious project design errors. And essentially what they say is if your design plans are defective, you'll inevitably be destined for cost overruns in construction projects. A design deficiency is a poorly designed, inaccurate or incomplete plan. Would you have anticipated some of the things, for example, that have, because there would have had to be a derogation given in relation, and did you have an input into that derogation, or did you give advice, or were you involved in any way in that? Because not locking things down, an incomplete plan, change orders, poor site management, all of those contribute. So could you maybe tell us, your role in this?
Okay. So I chair a Government Contracts Committee for Construction. It is a committee made up of representatives of all of the main capital spending departments, primarily people with a construction background, technical background. We are a forum, I suppose, an advice or an advisory body for the establishment of construction procurement policy. Government policy is governed really by the Capital Works Management Framework. So that's an online matrix or tool, a kit, if you like, for public bodies. I appreciate your...
very short on time.
Yeah, of course.
Short answer,
so the derogation process is set out under a circular. So when the Public Works contracts, the Capital Works Management Framework was introduced, which is mandatory. So it's a default position. You must use the suite of contracts that's published there. When they were published, there was a provision made for bodies whose project parameters didn't fit within the delivery mechanisms for a lump sum, typically a lump sum contract. And in addition to that, there is an early contractor involvement form of contract published under the Capital Works Management Framework, which also requires government contracts approval if you're going to use it. So that's how we became involved in the process, and we regularly advise public bodies, members of the GCC on these issues.
Yeah, and can I tell you, there's industry norms in a lot of these things. For example, we saw a programme the other night on RTE who succinctly put some of the points, and they were saying the lowest tender was 20% lower than the second lowest tender, and the third lowest tender was 45% higher than the lowest. Would that raise a flag with you in terms of industry norms?
It's very difficult to discuss an industry norm at the moment in the current tendering market. But let me just specify. So we've been through a period since the Public Works was published first in 2007. We went through a severe contraction in the industry and very, very competitive pricing.
These are people tendering at the same time for the same project?
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout that process, there was quite a spread of prices in tenders. Where this project is concerned, it's a bespoke project, as you've said. It carries, because of its size and scale, it carries particular risks because of that. And so the market is going to take a view at a given point in time as to what it believes the tender cost is going to, or the construction cost is going to be. The reason the two-stage process was chosen in this case was because of the scale of this project in comparison to the standard market, if you like, as it stands.
If there's a, I mean, what's very clear is that there is a process failure here in terms of the way this was proceeded with, and we can see in hindsight that that is a very costly way of doing things. And indeed, had this been presented, for example, as a project that was going to cost 1.7 billion plus, would it even be proceeded with? Would be a question. So it was incredibly important that this wasn't a guesstimate, but that it was a serious estimate. The way this was proceeded with seriously couldn't have been. There is a serious lack of expertise feeding into this by all appearance.
Well, that wouldn't necessarily reflect the actual situation. I mean, the Department of Health set up a specific delivery board and an executive group that have the requisite expertise. That, that's not normal in, where projects are concerned. So there is expertise there. The issue really is, Deputy, is when the meetings were being had and the discussions were being had about this two-stage process or the procurement strategy, the discussion was, and again, context is very important here. We had an industry that didn't show any signs of life up until September 2013. So there were serious concerns on the part of the Project Development Board, or the Hospital Board, as to whether the industry here had the capacity to deliver this project at the outset as the initial engagements were being had. So the tendering strategy had to reflect that. And that's why there is this different approach.
Yeah, can I just say that, I mean, in terms of another project that is on this, which really worries me now, I think there's a serious institutional gap here. When you more or less, when you do give a derogation, because and I don't see where the learnings are, because while we're discussing this as a real-time project, there's another project that is being dealt with on this list. That has been dealt with internally in the Department of Communications as it happens. And what we're hearing is there's the possibility of the 500 million that was outlined to begin with when it was announced becoming several billion. Now, how can we have any confidence that there is a control over things when they're announced? We're not saying that these projects are not needed, but the way you proceed with them may well be very different if you only have a particular amount of money. And for example, if it was 1.7 billion, the two-stage process was probably because of the site that was selected. Would that have happened had that been a greenfield site, for example?
Sorry, just first of all, the other project you were talking about, it isn't classed as a construction contract, so that the broadband scheme didn't come before the GCC. Okay, right. So the other issue.
So it shouldn't be on this list at all then.
No. I mean, it is. It's a capital investment, so it belongs there. But it's not. I mean, there are Irish Water projects, for example. Irish Water is a commercial semi-state. They don't come to the GCC either. It's only the direct exchequer-funded construction projects that come through the GCC. But to come back to the point, the difficulty we have is in an ever-changing market. You're talking about, the certainty and the cost and so on. As I pointed out to you, in 2013 we weren't quite sure where construction was going, and within 2 to 3 years we now have skills shortages in that sector as a result of investment. But sorry, Deputy, this is the issue. I mean, in terms of it's cost certainty at a point in time that you can deliver with a construction project.
I also asked you about a greenfield site.
Sorry, yes.
Two-stage process.
Yeah, so the greenfield site, I mean, it's not necessarily the site. Of course, that's part of it. That site would add complexity to a project. But the Children's Hospital is a complex project no matter where you put it in terms of a brief and scale. And so it's enough for the market to take a look at that and say, well, okay, this is a big project. There's a lot of risk associated with this.
We're on time because there's several to get in. We've agreed to finish at one. Quick comment.
I just want to come back on the point. Like, you've just made that point, but I'm coming back to the point of a 20% to the next tender, a 45% to the next.
Okay.
Surely there's a red flag raised and something like that, that there is something not right or needs to be interrogated in relation to the lowest price.
I can't obviously comment on the specifics here because I was not privy to the tender process. But yes, I mean, generally speaking, where prices come in and there is a difference, the contracting authority will look at those prices. And because you have a price breakdown, you're looking to see where that low price might be. Now, construction contracts and their pricing is inordinately complex. You won't have an item there that suggests there are going to be 300 individuals working on this site, so the labour cost is that. All of the costs are linked into work elements of the job. So there's a degree of forensics required. And the contractors are, through the process, they're encouraged to, obviously, to drive value for money. That's partially why we have the competitive process, is to ensure that we are getting the best possible price. But you're absolutely right. If the price is determined to be abnormally low, then the contracting authority has an obligation to investigate it, raise issues, seek clarification, and reach their conclusions. If they are of the view that the price is abnormally low, they may reject it, but they're not obliged to. They are only obliged to where it can be determined that the price is abnormally low, where there's a breach in labour, environmental or social security issues.
Thanks. I have to go to Deputy Cullinane, and we have to stick with the 10 minutes to get out on time. So.
Gormagat Coherlock, and welcome to Mr. Watt and his team. I will stick entirely to the basis upon which you were invited here today, Mr. Watt, because I have respect for your office. It's up to you as an accounting officer to ensure that respect to this committee goes both ways. But I just want to come back to your own opening statement, where you say that the selection, appraisal and delivery of individual public sector capital projects is the responsibility of each individual department. And that's correct. There's no quarrel from this committee in relation to that. And you also say that your department is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the National Development Plan within Project Ireland 2040, supporting value for money and protecting sustainable capital investment, which we also agree with and support. So if we look at Project Ireland 2040 and we look at the major projects under Project Ireland 2040, there are 10. All very worthy projects, it has to be said as well, all very important for the state, and we certainly agree with that. Of the 10 projects, which is the most advanced? So we have Metrolink, National Children's Hospital, Water Supply Project, Eastern and Midlands Region, the N20 Cork to Limerick, Galway City Ring Road, PPP for the M11, Gorey to Enniscorthy, Greater Dublin Drainage, N21, N69 Limerick to Adair, Fines, PPP on the N25 New Ross Bypass and the National Broadband Plan. Which one of those is at its most advanced stage?
So I think at this stage the M11, Gorey Enniscorthy motorway, which is due to be completed in 2019, will be completed
was there any
this year
cost overrun
and
that project?
I think the N25, the New Ross bypass, is also expected to be finished this year.
Grand. And both of those projects, was there a cost overrun?
So my understanding is the projects are developing in line with their budget and the profile.
Right.
Yeah.
And what would then the next project then? So they're fine, there was no cost overrun. Which is the next most advanced project?
Most advanced project. So the most advanced one then would be, not sure. So there's the water supply project, which is due to be submitted to Board Penola this year. That will be a while. It's Cork Limerick again, which is still in preliminary stage. The Galway Ring Road, October 2018, went to Board Penola. So the
any
others,
cost overruns in any of those projects? All very worthy projects, obviously. That you're aware of, any cost overruns?
Not that I'm aware of.
That you're aware of, no.
But
So
there are projects that are.
Oh, no, they're all very wordy. If we could just move on then to...
There are projects that are being constructed, so clearly projects where the spending is incurred.
Yes.
That's embedded in the profiles that departments
have. No significant cost overruns.
We'll evaluate how the actual spend is against.
You do hear the questions I'm putting, Mr. Watt, don't you? No cost overruns, or that you're aware of any significance at least.
The ones that are,
we'll continue on then and we work through the list. To be fair, to give all the projects their due credit, what would be the next most advanced project? Of the 10 major projects, we've gone through 4 or 5 there. There's no significant cost overruns, so that's good news at least.
Sorry, Deputy, what's the question?
You listed 4 or 5 projects that were very advanced. I'm saying there's no significant cost overrun, so there's 10 projects. If we can just work our way through them, which is the next most advanced one?
So which ones have we mentioned already? We've mentioned the roads, Cork, Limerick, Galway, Gorey, Enniscorthy, New Ross, Fines.
I think that might be just to be helpful to you, because I don't want to for this to descend into either me or you being accused of playing games, because this isn't a game, this is very serious. The National Children's Hospital is probably the next most advanced one, or certainly very advanced. And it is the one, or the only one, that I can see of these 10 projects where there is a very significant cost overrun to the state. Would that be a fair assessment?
There's a very significant cost overrun with the Children's Hospital, compared to the estimate that was provided to government in spring of 2017.
Very good. And if we come back to your opening statement then, where you are responsible for overseeing the implementation of the National Development Plan, Project Ireland 2040, supporting value for money and protecting sustainable capital investment. And of those 10 projects, the one which jumps out where there's a very significant cost overrun is the National Children's Hospital. So did your department ensure that we got value for money in that project, And by doing so, have we protected sustainable capital investment, given of the 10 projects, that is the one that we now know there is a very significant cost overrun?
So we don't know the details of all the projects, Deputy, because there are different stages.
But not what we do know. I'm saying what we do know.
Planning, preliminary works, they haven't started construction. And these are only 10 projects out of over 180, 200 projects that are in the tracker, that are significant projects, which we can provide to the committee another day, Chair, if that would help.
But we already agreed a few moments ago in our conversation that of the 10 major projects, we're dealing with the major projects. The National Children's Hospital is the only one, thankfully, because I'm assuming that you can take credit for the other projects which have come in on budget, but the one which hasn't, and where there is a significant cost overrun, is the National Children's Hospital, that we're aware of. It's the one where there is the potential for the most significant cost overrun.
I don't think anybody is taking credit for what I set out in the opening statement, which I think is a valid point to make, lest people who watch these proceedings think otherwise, that not every project has significant challenges of the type of the Children's Hospital. Not every project is delayed or has overruns of the scale that we've seen. And we wanted to contextualise the debate, because I think it would be very disappointing if people actually thought that taxpayers' money, that all projects are being subject to the types of overruns that we've seen in relation to.
But I have to be very precise in my questions, and I would hope that you would be equally precise because we have a 10-minute slot, and what I'm repeating back to you is what you've given us in your opening statement, which is you have a responsibility for supporting value for money. Yep. So on that one, can you today, as the accounting officer for the department, be confident that we have got value for money so far in relation to the National Children's Hospital as one of the 10 major projects?
So the accounting officer for the department is, for this project, is the Department of Health, the accounting officer of the Department of Health. So value for money, I think the issue here, in terms of if we're building a children's hospital and building at that site, so would alternative procurement processes or ways of going about this, would it have led to a different price outcome or a different cost outcome? We don't know the answer to that question.
Well, as somebody that did look at it, actually, and we'll ventilate this one for a moment, because
so
that's a reasonable...
I was just finishing. May I finish, Chair, my answer to the question? So if we had gone with a traditional lump sum contract, and David has discussed in detail earlier on in this meeting the ins and outs of that, and why this particular approach was adopted, it's not clear that the counterfactual here would have actually led to a better outcome for the state or the taxpayer. That's not clear, in my view. So everybody regrets. I think the ministers have been very clear in terms of regretting what happened here, and disappointed with the fact that the costs are now coming in way above what was expected in the spring of 2017. That's not to say that an alternative approach would deliver better value for money. That's not clear. In terms of the overall value,
take my time back. I got that. I hear what you're saying, Mr. Watt, and I'm been trying to be extremely fair to you in the sense I'm repeating back what you said in your opening statement, that it is your responsibility to ensure that there's value for money. The line ministers and the line departments can have their view. I asked you for your view, and you've somewhat given me a response, but I do want to test that by coming back to one report that did examine this, which is the Mazars report. And the Mazars report looked at the cost overrun as well, and in general terms, it showed that the guaranteed maximum price ballooned, that the design team made guesses on cost, that the value engineering savings did not materialise to any significant degree, that the philanthropy fell through, the McDonald's accommodation being one. It also found that the procurement process added to the cost overrun costs. And it raised questions in relation to this fast-track two-stage tender procurement model. That was the Mazars report, which is the only one that we know of so far that has actually examined this in any detail. So first of all, would DEPR, which our department, have had to sign off on that fast-tracked two-stage tender procurement model?
So we discussed this already in detail, Deputy, today.
Yeah.
We've set out already the position. So the Contracts Committee had discussions with the National Children's Board. The National Children's Board came with a proposal and sought a derogation from the lump sum contract. And they sought that derogation, as David has mentioned, because of the complexity of this project. That it's in order to set out a detailed design for this project and to bring that to the market and have a lump sum contract, that there would have been very significant costs undertaken in terms of development and design, but also would have been time delay.
Is that a long-winded way of saying that you did sign off on it?
So,
like the question was, did the department sign off on the procurement model?
So, let me just say again, which we've repeated earlier.
Yeah.
You may not have been here, so I'll repeat it again.
Yeah.
That the Contracts Committee gave a derogation, and this Contracts Committee is chaired by David, and there are people from different sanctioning authorities. It's not the only derogation. I think there are 10 projects over the last number of years where derogations have been given. So a derogation was given from the normal lump sum contract because the view was, the collective view of the people at the committee was that it wouldn't have been possible to deliver the hospital within a time scale and get a competitive process for it on the basis of a lump sum contract, given the inherent risk involved in such a complex project. And I think this comes back to what Deputy Murphy was mentioning a few moments ago, that when it comes to repeat projects, motorways, schools, primary care centres, we have a much better idea in terms of the unit cost. So we know, for example, that it's about 10 to 12 million per kilometre for a motorway. That depends on the number of 10 to 12 million per kilometre for a motorway. Now, that would vary depending on the number of flyovers you'd have and the nature of the topology and so forth. But that's the broad indicator. We know that primary schools cost 5 to 6 million. We know secondary schools cost. So I'm just putting to contextualise it, Chair, because it's very important. Like, for a lot of what the state does, we have a reasonable good idea because we're building the same over and over again. But obviously for the Children's Hospital, it's once off, I suppose.
Okay, Deputy, you have 1 minute left.
I can't, and again, so I'm clear, and I don't want to misinterpret at all what the accounting officer is saying. There was a derogation given then on the procurement process. So how rarely or how popular is that two-stage, fast-track two-stage?
It's not popular. The vast majority of projects are...
Very unusual then, isn't it?
It's unusual, yeah.
Unusual.
No, it's not unique. As I mentioned, we've done it 10 times.
Okay, and because my time is precious, it's not unusual, it's not unique, it's actually very unusual to use this.
Yeah, it's unusual. Yeah.
And as a consequence, and this is the point, we used a very unusual, not very unique but very unusual process. And lo and behold, that very unusual process has resulted in, of all of the projects, the 10 projects we've discussed, all of the others have not come in over cost. This one has come over overspent by 400 million euro.
We used a derogation from the common standard contract because of the nature of the project.
And maybe that wasn't the right thing to do.
Okay. No, and I've set out in my note here the lessons that we've learned from this, and it's about us not committing significant spending on preliminary works until we have the final tender cost. So I've addressed it.
I have to move on to Deputy. You've said about 3 times there are other derogations, or other two-stage.
I think we've written to you, Chair, about it. I think we have. I think. Oh, it was the other committee. I'm getting confused with all these committees.
So just name a few of them. Sorry. Just briefly, what projects were they? Sorry, for a quick second.
Sorry, the microphone isn't it? Currently, the only other two-stage at the moment, which is slightly different, there's no early works part of it, it's early services purely, is Dunkettle. The works done, that's...
But we got the impression here there was a number of few.
No, sorry, no, derogations.
Can I just, sorry, no, just a very quick question.
No, you're...
Who's the contractor on Dunkettle?
Who's
the contractor on Dunkettle in that project?
The early stage...
Sorry, can I have the answer? Who's the contractor on Dunkettle?
As far as I'm aware, I'm obviously not part of the tendering process, but I think it's CISC's.
It's CISC.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to hand over to Deputy Connolly. You have 10 minutes.
Oh, myself. Oh, sorry, my next. Oh, sorry. Good morning.
And we're tight for time because we're up against
That's grand. I'll be quick. So just to follow on from the previous questions, just to clarify, the two-stage, this derogation on the two-stage tender, to allow this two-stage tender process, we have the Dunkettle and we have the Children's Hospital. They're the only two ever. Is it contracts? I'm just not sure because I know you said one thing, Mr. O'Brien. Excuse me. Yeah. I have 10 minutes. Yeah. So can I just clarify that for the committee? 10 to 12 projects, 12, one of my colleagues said 10, Mr. Watt said. How many of those projects, how many two-stage projects have been granted this derogation over the last so many years?
So just to clarify, and what we do, maybe Chair is right to you, just to make sure there's no confusion about it. So we've had 12 derogations from the lump sum contract since 2011, but not all of them have been to a two-stage process. Okay, so there are other options.
Yes, so that's my question
so we'll come back to you.
Sorry, of the 12, and there's been derogation for other reasons, obviously, I get this. How many of them have been two-stage? Two. One is Dunkettle, one's the hospital. Mr. O'Brien, you were on the Contracts Committee, and I know we've discussed this. Can you just give me the year when it was discussed? When was this derogation granted? What year did that happen?
So the process began.
So when did the memo come to? When was this discussion? Just the year.
Well, the problem is, Deputy, it took a little longer than a year. So the process, there were meetings. They made presentations to the committee on 2 occasions. One was a preliminary procurement strategy, and the second one was I suppose the final procurement tendering strategy. So the first one, and there was a note to the committee back in May 2014. The presentation by the board on the draft proposal was May 2015, a year later, and they came back again in April 2016, just to finalise on a couple of issues. And it's in April 2016
that the derogation was granted and this process could start?
Well, yeah, but we don't control the whole process. The derogation is simply that you don't have to use the standard contract. You then have your own strategy and you're responsible for that.
And your expertise, as you're an architect, I just looked up your profile, your experiences in social housing, urban regeneration. Now, I actually have a personal interest in architecture. It's just one of my things I do read about. So there's a huge difference between, we've heard it here and we've had the argument, oh, it costs this much to build a house and there's this much. Yeah. So we've used that argument here that we're not building houses. So I just throw that back at you. I mean, how would you have the expertise, and perhaps I'm missing something out of your profile, where's your expertise in delivering large projects? And maybe I'm completely wrong, and maybe I missed a massive chunk of your CV, but I don't see any expertise in delivering large infrastructural projects.
I'm not employed to deliver the massive infrastructural projects. The members of the committee are and have massive expertise in that area.
Okay, so as an architect, with your expertise, be it in building a house or otherwise, would it not be obvious to you that if you use a 2-stage process, that I can't see how you wouldn't have said this sort of process would be fraught with overruns because of the complexities? Okay. That's really what I'm getting at. I mean, I'm trying to be helpful here, and we've had so many meetings on this, and we're constantly here for people watching at home. But for people watching at home, the question is, how do we get from 650 to 1.73? And that's really what we want to get to the answer here, because normal people at home building a shed or whatever, you know, if they have €650, they don't have 700. The shed has to be built for 650. So I'm just trying, how transferable for people at home. Can you explain how we've gone from 650 to 1.7?
Okay. I come in here as chair. That's a matter for the accounting officer in the Department of Health. It can't be answered. Okay. And they are coming back in again with the paediatric board. And there's a little bit, they have no responsibility for the carrying out of the contract, you know, and they are coming in separately again. So the specifics on that are straight for the paediatric board, HSE and health, and they are coming back.
So in terms of Mr. O'Brien's expertise in the area, would you have had any thoughts at the time as to what this would be fraught with difficulties?
Absolutely.
With your experience?
Not only myself, but other members of the committee raised those issues as part of the engagement. So we accepted that the contract couldn't be delivered using the lump sum, the standard form. And then there's usually a discussion process around what the merits and the demerits of the solutions and so on are. And issues were raised, of course, about that. I mean, we're well aware of the risk of a contract remeasurement bill. Prior to the introduction of the public works contracts, we had remeasurement contracts. But the strategy was designed to arrive at a cost certainty at the GMP, so that we got the expertise of the contractor in to deliver and de-risk, so that we weren't going to be left, which quite often happens on large infrastructure projects, with the nasty surprise 4 years down the line. So that was why this form of contract.
But clearly that's a failure, because we have had the nasty surprise.
You've had the nasty surprise up front, Deputy.
Pardon?
The work on the hospital itself, so the building in the basement, is the preliminary works. The hospital, the GMP, covers the construction of the hospital.
Ground.
Yes. So you are aware up front
subject to the points that Deputy MacSharry raised earlier on, which is standard in most contracts in terms of compensation events and those sorts of issues. So that's why the process is used, so that you get those issues dealt with.
Yes, you can just warehouse the basement as such and start from the ground up, and you get your. I get it. Yeah.
Yes, so it's speed of delivery.
So, would you be happy to the future to say that this is a good way to go about business?
Well,
perhaps, obviously, we have to learn all these lessons and all that. But leaving that aside, would you? Because I think Mr. Watt, and maybe I misinterpreted, wouldn't be up for this sort of type of contract again. So I'd just like to see there's varying views. Maybe I'm misinterpreting.
So, yeah, like, thanks, Deputy. My view is that we shouldn't commit to a contract which has significant works, preliminary works, unless we have greater clarity around ultimately the design and therefore the final costs. So the issue, one of the issues that arose here in effect was that the government had already committed spending because the works, as you mentioned, and they're very significant works in relation to the hospital site here, committed works which we're spending on before we had final sight of the tender.
So your view?
So my view is that we should not, and not my view, it's the government's view. The government agreed, Minister for Finance brought a number of measures to the government a few weeks ago, which I've set out in my statement again to help the discussion. Brought a number of measures to try learn the lessons from this and to ensure that we don't commit that type of spending again, because ultimately the government is caught in a bind. Because if,
I get it.
I think the big question, the big issue here, I think it was Deputy Connolly or Deputy Murphy mentioned earlier about this. The question is, if we had known the cost of all the options here, the actual final cost of the options, what would we have done? What would the state have done? That's the question. Okay, that's the question.
But Mr. O'Brien has sort of...
And I don't know what the answer. We don't know what the answer to that question is, but that is ultimately the question. And so we need to ensure that.
But Mr.
We need to ensure that that doesn't happen again.
I just want to let my colleagues in. Mr. O'Brien's comments sort of suggest that you think it was the right way to go about it.
Well, I'm not saying it was the wrong way. I'm not saying it was the wrong way.
You just wouldn't do it again.
I don't think we could do that.
Okay.
But sorry, Robert, if I can, we still have to understand what happened in this process. So this is the point of the review. When that is known, then steps will be taken to address the issues. But the issue was raised with the board in terms of risk at that point, in terms of cost certainty, how are you going to deliver it, not to mention procurement risk. And we were given to understand that the project will be measured accurately, that the process that people would engage in was to bring greater certainty to this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the issue is for, I think, people at home is that, you know, we've come out of a time of austerity. Everybody in Ireland has suffered as a result, and it's very, very disappointing, I think, for members of this committee and the public to have this in front of us and hear things like lessons learned into the future X, Y and Z, because when you have this project of such a scale, you'd kind of wonder why lessons will be learned in the job. I just want to make one final comment. On the last page of the opening statement with the new lessons learned way of going about things, the final paragraph says, secondly, a number of high-profile projects have highlighted issues with the performance of advisory firms. We will link payments to advisory firms to clear performance standards. We will bring in performance standards linked to payments in future contracts. To me, that's like longhand for bonus. Is it, or am I reading it wrong? Bonus culture. That's like, we're going to pay the lads money to deliver the job on time. That's what I read from that.
Look, I know in our discourse now, that's a toxic term, okay?
Absolutely, that's why you didn't use it, but that's what it is.
No, but it'd be much better to have a contract which says half of the money is for, and the rest of it, the other half, is if you do it right. You can call it a bonus if you wish. It's an incentive. It's an incentive scheme. It'd be much better to do that.
Oh, I'm all for incentivising. I'm just wondering. I just want to make sure that that's what I'm reading, and I'm not.
It'd be much better to say to a firm, "Oh, you said that, you know, whatever, Deputy MacSharry's road, the N4 or whatever, is going to cost." And hang on, what did you do here? Didn't. So you're not getting paid your final 40%.
Well, it makes sense.
So that's what we're trying to. But we don't. That's what we're trying to think about.
Okay, next speaker is Deputy.
Thank you.
We agree with 10 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. I try to be less because I'm not going to go over what happens when you said, but I can't leave here today without asking something about the hospital because it is the subject of the day and the subject out there on everyone's mind. So just to finish with the last speaker asked you. Why did they only know the preliminary costs? Why doesn't some expertise we have here now that we didn't know, something that was started at 600 and something million, ended up at 1.4 now and probably will end up at 2? Why? That's the question. But all the Joe Soap out there and Mary Soap out there, they want to know, the taxpayer, why didn't someone, or why didn't you bring professional people that say, yes, the first preliminary thing it cost 600 million, but then there's extras, add-ons, whatever it is, that it will end up at 1.4 million or 2 million. I mean, someone should know that.
I think somebody does, and I think it's been set out. Deputy in the Bazaar's report, I think set out. I think somebody mentioned it a moment ago. The Bazaar's report sets out the elements of it. And the PwC review, and no doubt your further conversations you'll have as part of it. I don't think there's any mystery here as to what happened. I think it's very clear the reasons for the cost overruns now. The issue for us is...
But it's simply called overruns.
No, it is true. I think the way I would characterise, I think up to the point when the government were asked to decide in spring 2017 that it was 980 million, I think it's from that moment where we are now, where clearly the project not developed in line with what was expected. I think that's absolutely legitimate, and that's the source of a lot of the debate and the discussion. And there are reasons for that around the mismeasurement of the bill of quantities. There's around value engineering savings which aren't secured. There was some design scope which can happen in the scale of the contract, and other issues. But I think Deputy, that is the question, and I think that, I think the people in the National Children's Board, and they know, they've set it out. I think the documentation is publicly available.
We know that the Department for Health is responsible for this project, but you also play a part in public expenditure. So where does the buck stop? I mean, have you the power to say, look, this started at 900 million, now it's at 1.5 billion? What power have you there to come in at that stage, you and your department? I mean, because you're responsible for the money, and the Department of Health. Who is responsible for it? Is the Department of Health here, or the board or the hospital? Who is actually responsible for this happening, and that wasn't explained to the ordinary people, right?
So I think it's the sponsoring agency is, in this case, the National Children's Board, and they were responsible for managing the project for the sanctioning authority, and they're responsible for what happened. In terms of the decision, ultimately it was the government who had to make a decision, Deputy, as you know.
Yes, I know that.
And the government made that decision in December as to what to do, and they had to make a decision as to stop the project, not move to phase 2 and write off the money and restart again and have a children's hospital, whatever site or whatever cost, whatever time in the future, or to proceed with the decision on the hospital, even though it was going to cost us more money. That was the decision that the government, as you know, Deputy, that was the decision the government took.
This children's hospital has been in controversy for 20 years now. We had the Mater, then we went to Cullinane, then we went up here, and then we're talking about the new Greenfield site out in the Western Barons, which a lot of people still think they should be out there, because they maintain this is only half a project. There should be a maternity hospital there, should be a children's hospital with the main hospital as well, a general hospital as well, and that should be built out there. But that's another issue. That's the government decision. That's not your decision. I understand that, and that's driven by the government of the day. But what I want to know is what effect will this have on other projects? I mean, you spoke about the Ross bypass, which is my constituency, and all these. They are all going to be finished. But the other projects, we have primary cares, and not in primary care, I think it's about 8 have approached me that are in the pipeline. Now think they're going to be withdrawn. The billing that's going to be has to come out somewhere. Has anyone, do you know, as the responsible body, where this money is going to be taken on, who's going to suffer, or where are we going to lose out again in rural Ireland, or where are we going to lose out on these projects?
So, I think the government have set out there in terms of what it means for this year.
But there's no attendance where, though.
In terms of the projects how it's going to be funded for this year. I think generally the capital plan and the Project 2040, it is going to be by its nature iterative. And this is something which I think we have to be honest with people about. There will be projects that will accelerate. There will be projects that won't go as fast as we expect. And the profiles will have to be adjusted in the future, no matter what government is here. That's the nature of it. It's a longer-term plan. So, these are the key projects that the government feels should be supported, and most of them are supported by every deputy in the House, because they're common sense, proven roads, schools, hospitals, and so forth. But how this plan is delivered over time will, Deputy, you know, it'll evolve. It's not cast in stone. It'll be evolved.
Somebody is going to suffer in the short term. £1 billion is a lot of money. Somebody is going to suffer now. That should have been going ahead. Because it overrun the Children's Hospital is going to take $1 billion extra. That money has to be got somewhere. So somebody's going to suffer. I mean, that's logic. We can't deny that. And we're not going to get another billion.
No, and there's an opportunity cost to everything we do, not just spending more money on capital. There's an opportunity cost for higher pay, for more spend on anything.
But I can't be worried about my constituency. I'm worried about the serious system that's promised money that that's supposed to be there next year, we own little parish, and now it could go back 3-4 years. I'm just giving an example.
Well,
everything's local. Politics are all local. You know that yourself. We all have an election locally as well.
I'm aware of that.
I just want to ask you about broadband again. And the Taoiseach himself has said that the quotation for broadband that was mentioned already could be a multiple of that. I just want to ask you now, as responsibility for the money again to spend. What's your comment on that? On the broadband scheme that's promised to be rolled out with the last 5 years, that might be rolled out for other 5.
So I think I'll let the Minister and the Government talk about broadband when they're ready to talk about broadband.
But if it's the multiple again, are we back to square one again as we have in the Children's Hospital? If we're starting to talk about 500,000 million of a rollout, and now all of a sudden it could end up at 2 billion. I mean, this is flippant about money to save us is nothing. $1 billion is still $1 billion.
Yeah. But he can help you. Our next meeting after the break is with the Department of Indicate.
No, but I'm only asking the Department for Public Expenditure Reform if broadband is going to go another 400% more. I mean, they must surely have a comment to make on that if they're responsible for the money and the spend and how to spend. I mean, I know the department is responsible, but these are responsible for the money overall. So, like the public are listening here, what's your comment on if it goes up 400%?
I think I'll let the relevant minister, with all due respect, Deputy.
For a minister of the government.
I have views, but any comment would be career changing.
But it's just spending the money. I'm trying to follow the money again. I'm not following the project.
I know everybody's interested in the outcome of that, but we shall see.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Deputy, I can't.
No, you can't answer that one yet. Okay. At this stage now, we've how many minutes left, and we're stopping on the button. How many are indicating to speak? That's about 2 minutes apiece, right? I take them in the sequence that I started with. Marc MacSharry, 3 minutes max.
Okay, starting now
for each person.
Just on the inflation thing, and we were talking earlier on, Secretary General, you mentioned, look, this is an estimate, like, so you remember when you were saying about when you're doing the two-stage process, whatever, there was an understanding of an estimate, and we established that it's not going to be 1.7 billion, it's going to be more because the inflation thing tied in. Where's Ireland 2040 then, in terms of, I mean, I know you touched on this now in your comments a few minutes ago, in terms of 116 billion, I mean, you know, if there's going to be, if the same 4% above 4% construction inflation applied, really, you want to have an awful lot more in the drawer than 116 billion to cover the projects that are announced in 2040. Would that not be the case?
Well, it depends on how projects evolve over time.
Yeah.
You know, like.
But I mean, because Mr. Wright said that all contracts really are.
But you know this, like in terms of the schools building programme.
Yeah.
So the Department of Education has their allocation, whatever, and they're committed to deliver these various schools. But you know, this has always been the way. Like, they were able to deliver more schools if the tender prices became softer.
Yeah.
The prices fell, you have to deliver more.
Right.
All this depends ultimately on the capacity of the sector.
So it's a relative unknown, albeit we're picking 116 million.
But so the 116 billion was the amount that, based on where we projected the economy to be over the next number of years, what a prudent amount for us to set aside for capital investment, so 4% of GNI.
So our best guess is it's going to be 116 billion, but it doesn't really take account of inflation.
So the economy gets bigger.
Hopefully.
So that's a nominal increase, which is the real and obviously the deflator. Okay. So over time, and if you look at the numbers, there's very significant nominal increases in spending in the future. The individual projects, Deputy, will depend, of course, on the spec and the design and so.
Okay, I've only a very short minute. Just a few very quick questions. The business case on the hospital, would your department have asked or insisted or requested that the development board of the hospital, the delivery board, as Mr. O'Brien referred to it, did a cost-benefit analysis on the business case price?
So appraisal has to be done, and appraisal.
Did they do that?
Yeah, they did.
Okay, that's grand. That's that answer, because I just have two other things.
No, because we have.
This is not about. I'm going to ask you. This question is about process process. It's not about individual ministers or governments, but just so that we could get an understanding. You've served through various administrations. Projects have gone well and badly for all parties and none over the years, right? I just want to know, as a matter of practice, and not specifically the current minister, all ministers, is there a process that on a weekly, monthly or quarterly business, the minister of the day sits down with yourself or whomever and says, these are the 50 capital projects and here's the update? And what frequency does that happen, or does it happen at all?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Like, I'm sure for the Department of Transport that the minister will get an update on the main capital projects from TII. But collectively,
in terms of deeper, it's a no.
So obviously for the departments, the projects for which we're responsible.
Yeah.
But it's a valid point. We have been debating in the context of the delivery board about whether we should publish an annual report on capital infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that would
I would think the minister today would be very useful for them.
No, but
look, monthly to say, here's where we're at. That's an aside. It's not about the current minister.
This is important responding to it. So we now have a tracker, which we didn't have previously, of I think it's 180, 200 of the top projects. So we now have a tracker on those in our department, which we published. I think that we're updating the version of it, so it'll be back on the website soon. And that
he's going to cut me off, you see.
And that gives oversight then to the government overview of the entire project.
Okay, Deputy Kelly.
I promise this is the final, because it's just following on. I loved your last statement in your statement, and Deputy O'Connell captured it very well, in that you feel the performance relationship in terms of actual delivery rather than bonus is the way to go. Can I ask, what tangible sanctions are you recommending by way of reform for state personnel that may be asleep at the wheel or didn't do a good enough job? I mean, what tangible sanction can the public feel are in place that if Officer A, Secretary General B did not perform, what kind of oversight or what kind of recourse are we going to have there in terms of your proposed reform?
Well, I think ultimately it has to come back down to the nature of, what I was talking about, this contract is about, you're asked to do a particular project, you're asked to, spec something. Discrete piece of work where you can then say, well, you can define afterwards how well did you do in specing it. So you said you'd need 10 windows. How many did you actually need? Or not that simple, but you don't want to make it. So what I'm suggesting is that we should link payment to the delivery then. So you said something and then you said what? That's relatively straightforward.
Okay, I have to call Deputy
when you're
Kelly.
Thinking about the overall management of something, it's more unclear as to who's responsible.
Okay, we're into 3-minute slots now. 3-minute slots. That's it.
I want to ask something on a different project, on the water supply project. If you could just, and I speak here with obviously a bit of experience from a previous occupation that I had, and also the actual project is coming from right where I'm from, over the road. A full environmental impact assessment report and a Natura impact statement, NAS, are being prepared. So could you just, and if you don't have all the information, Secretary General, you can supply it to us in writing afterwards, if that's all right. Could you just tell us the timelines you see for this project going forward over a number of years? I note because obviously you plan ahead. I'm on board with all of this year, I understand. So that's, firstly, can you supply us with the timelines as regards you see this project moving forward? The scale of this project, is there, and I flag a big flag here for scope creep as regards to the project, because essentially this will be an Irish rail for water. It's not just bringing water to Dublin, there is the Midlands and all of that, which, by the way, is fine. So the timelines for this project, the potential for scope creep, and thirdly, how is this going to be tendered, given the conversations we've had? Because is this one project, or is it multiple projects? I have genuine questions. I don't know. I mean, kick off a few years ago, I understood, but I don't know what's the up-to-date for timelines. Go to on board from all of this year. Over the next few years, projects creep, which I'm genuinely concerned about. And finally, how will this be tendered? Will it be in blocks, or will it be one big project, or has that been decided? But surely something must have been decided if we've plans going out for the next few years. And on the last comment, under Project 2040, it's not your area, because policy, in fairness, as a public servant, isn't you to implement policy. But I would have concerns about this as regards Project 2040, as regards regionalisation and the scale of it, given the fact we need to redesign how our population is going. But anyway, that's a different story. Those 3 questions. Thank you.
Now, what I will say to you, Mr. Watt, any information that you don't have to hand, get it abroad. I know Irish Water is Irish Water, but you're here dealing with capital projects. And I just want to put in the record in this document, in relation to Irish Water project, 6.8 billion is direct exchequer funding and 1.7 is Irish Water. So the overwhelming majority is still state direct exchequer funding.
It's a fair point, and and obviously there's projects here which are funded by user charges, there's PPPs, and there's direct. So we'll come back to you, Deputy, in relation to the projects. I don't know the details of it. Like this is an enormous project.
Yeah, huge.
I don't know whether it's on one lump sum or there are parts of it. I don't know. We'll come back to you.
Basically, if you come back, and I have no problem with that. I mean, if you don't have the answer, it's fine. Briefing on it, basically, the status of it over the next few years, what's planned, the tendering and scope creep. Genuine interest, because if it was just say there's a big difference between a pipeline from Bird Hill to the outskirts of Dublin or an Irish Rail type of network which is going off into Mullingar and into the Midlands and all that, 2 totally different type of projects scale wise. So what's the plan?
And the final comment I make to that, the role of the regulator as well in this process, because they're a regulated body. Deputy Connolly, 3 minutes.
Two quick questions and a comment. Just in relation to the Galway City Ring Road, and it's Depot and all, you don't need to comment on that, but it says at detailed appraisal stage. What does that mean? Is that by your department? And just clarify that. The second thing is, under the National Treasury Management Agency, that National Development Finance Agency, is that what it's called? Did they have a role in the Children's Hospital at all? What role, if any? And the last comment I'd make, Mr. Watt, is example from the top is extremely important, and that accountability. For example, in Galway, 2 theatres, and you may say, what has this got to do with anything? But it comes into accountability. 2 operating theatres went out of action in 17. We have been waiting for a year and 3 months for procurement, and we were told, for example, contracts were exchanged last February, and we're in March, and contracts still we're being informed are being exchanged. So with that kind of language, you can see how, if people think that language at this level of not accountability is acceptable, we're left in Galway being told in February 18 contracts gone out to be signed, and we're in 19 and we're told no, they weren't contracts, they were letters of offer and all sorts of waffle. So that's why, example, I don't expect you to comment on that, but the other 2 I do expect an answer on.
So the detailed assessment in relation to the Galway City Ring Road, the appraisal is in effect then the route and then the detailed assessment then of...
Well, who's doing that? Sorry, no, it's at appraisal stage.
So that'd be the Transport Authority, that'd be the TII. TII will be doing that, yeah.
Okay.
Consult with them and get the note back. With
lovely. And the other one was the National...
And the NDFA. The NDFA were involved in this project up until 2016, but they're now involved with the project since 2016. This was at various stages, particularly in relation to the Matter site, when the Matter was going to be the preferred site.
So they were involved.
And finally, Deputy Murphy.
Yeah, if you're going to take on a project, you have to know you're going to be able to pay for it. In 2016, the National Children's Hospital was announced, and the figure that was given by the Taoiseach was 650 all in. Where would that figure have come from? Would your department have had under the big capital projects, would they have had a guesstimate at that stage? And in relation to a linked, it's a capital project as well, is the same the case in relation to the National Broadband Plan? Is it a guesstimate? Is it an estimate? How does that play out?
So, my own view, Deputy, for once-off bespoke projects of the type we've been talking about, that if you produce an estimate, it is a guesstimate until you actually get to a detailed design and you tender for it. So it is based on, so it might be based on some cost matrix or unit costs or some approach, or somebody said, okay, a children's hospital in the UK was built and it had these specs, and what was the cost?
So it was a guesstimate at that stage.
I don't think, No,
that's fair enough.
I wouldn't want that to be seen as a pejorative term, okay?
Yeah.
But because you have to have some idea of where we're looking at. But ultimately, the cost, and I think this is where we need to get away from saying that that project cost that amount. We only really know when somebody is willing to say, I will charge you 100 million for doing that.
I remember that there was a delay. I have a memory of there being a delay because if finances were being put in order, you had to be able to show that you were able to pay for it. Yeah. So there was an upper limit on that as well. So there should have been some tolerance within that guesstimate, that it would be at least an average.
And that's why we're talking about the risk premium. So what we're saying in future, if a department comes to us and says, we think that's going to be 200 million, well, we'll say, well, based on our experience of doing certain types of projects, if it's a brownfield site or whatever, we will add 50%, and we'll say, in actual fact, it's 300 million now.
Yeah,
so that has to happen, because otherwise the system will be gamed where people will, of course, come in low to get the government to commit to it. And of course it'll be much more than that ultimately.
Because there would have been a lot more people tendering for it if they thought the project was going to be 1.4 million for construction. 1.4 million for construction.
Yeah, I don't. Not necessarily, but yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And the broadband, is 500 million a guesstimate? Has there been a guesstimate on it?
So we don't know the price of broadband until somebody says that's how much it's going to cost to put fibre as per the contract. That's the reality of it.
So that could be, think of a number and multiply it by 6, or it could be, right, we don't know.
So as I said, the Minister will talk about this, I think, in due course, the broadband plan. Yeah,
okay, that's fair enough. Okay. Parliament.
Thank you.
At this stage now, I'm going to conclude this session here, and I want to thank Mr. Watt and his officials for being with us here today. And we're going to suspend until 2 o'clock. We're back to do our normal routine correspondence and clear our periodic report in private session to be launched next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. And that periodic report has had a couple of readings already with members of the committee, and it shouldn't take long to finalise it. And that covers the period from September up to last December, covering our meeting. So hopefully the afternoon won't be too long. So the meeting is now suspended. Thank you. And we're going to resume with the normal business of the Public Accounts Committee. We met with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform this morning, and now we're dealing with other items. First item on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting of the 28th of February. They're agreed and published. There's nothing arising that we won't deal with in the normal course of events in the meeting. The next item, there are 3 categories of correspondence. The first category is briefing document from the departments. We'll note and publish this and the opening statement this morning. We don't have a reference number for that, but the opening statement this morning and the briefing documents we'll note and publish. Okay, that's agreed, and I haven't the reference.
2034.
Yeah, okay, 2034, and then there's 2037 and
2034 and 2037.
And 2034 and 2037 are the technical reference numbers, but we know what the documents are. So they're agreed and published, and we've already discussed them this morning. Item 2 is correspondence from accounting officers and our ministers and follow-up to PSE meetings. The first one is item 2013 from Barry Donoghue, Deputy Director, Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, dated 25th of February, providing information requested by the committee as follows: details of fees paid to Prosecution Council, public sector organisations that can initiate district court prosecutions, delegation of prosecution authority to Garda Síochána, and statistics read the outcomes of indictable cases. So we note and publish this. The only item I just draw attention to is it's a surprise to me to see that there are 21 agencies of the state that can initiate prosecutions in their own right. We all thought it was the DPP and 1 or 2 others, but the Health and Safety Authority, the Consumer Protection Commission, obviously the EPA, Sea Fisheries Protection Authority, Data Protection Commissioners, Central Bank Road Safety Authority, and PUS can initiate license or court proceedings in respect of TV licence, gas networks for people who interfere with their meters and equipment, the same with ESB networks and the National Transport Authority. So just by way of information, who else can issue prosecutions? And there's quite a big list there. Then the next thing then was the general direction to Garda Síochána. I think I might have mentioned the issue of they do a lot of the cases in the district court, and it's probably the background to that. Then the indictable cases, trial outcome by year outcome, and they're saying that in 2018 there was 2588 cases. The convictions were 2410, and which represented a 93% rate. Okay, and then finally they pay very informative information for people to see: fees to council based on the fees in the Circuit Court, High Court and Supreme Court asset seizing cases, Central Criminal Court, Book of Evidence, consultations, the High Court, briefing fees for judicial reviews, the Supreme Court and High Court appeals and Supreme Court and Court of Appeal, and Sea Fisheries District Court and Health and Safety District Court, and conferences. So they give, you know, the case fees, the refresher fees, etc., for senior and junior councils, and people can read and have a look at that and wonder, is it a good paying profession to join? Yeah, I think that's it. So the next item then is correspondence 2016 from Maria Brown, Chief State Solicitor, providing information requested by the committee, and we asked details in relation to the annual costs for the Courts Recovery Unit. That's listed there. That's a short letter. Then a breakdown of the number of vacancies within the Chief State Solicitor's office, including the length of time that vacancies have been open. They give a detailed list of the 15 pre-existing vacancies and where they are in terms of filling posts, and they say Garda clearance and all that does take a couple of months in some of these cases, so we can understand they have to be particularly cautious. Then they have a note on the process for lottery grants. We raised the issue with the Chief State Solicitor's Office, because many of us would have encountered when dealing with the Minister for Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, and especially the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport. We've all encountered cases where grants couldn't be approved because we were told with the Chief State Solicitor's Office. We asked for the figures, and the figures we got were in 2017 there were 89 cases, but in 2018 there were 264 cases, probably because the lottery applications were open that year, and this year so far there's 19. We want to write back to them. They didn't give us a figure of how many cases were outstanding at the end of the year. It's fine telling us how many cases they got. We have no idea what was processed and what was outstanding. So we need the figures of, because we mentioned the delays and they give various reasons, but they don't give us any breakdown of how many were still outstanding at the end of the year. Next item then is PAC 2018 from Ray Mitchell, the HSC, providing information to the committee regarding the procurement arrangements for Section 38 and 39 organisations and any conflict of interest that may arise in relation to any former managers of the HSE being implied in Section 38 and 39 organisations. So there's a note there, a page and a half. We note it and publish it, and I think we move on, and that's agreed. Next item is 2019 from Adrian O'Driscoll, who is the Secretary-General, Department of Justice, dated 27th of February, providing information in relation to the operation of the Criminal Justice Operational Hub, including a timetable for its completion. And this is to allow the centralised facility for data to be exchanged between existing ICT systems in the criminal justice agencies and accessed in an anonymised format for the purpose of research and developing evidence-based policy. And he also gives us a breakdown compliance with data protection legislation, etc. So we asked that when he was here, and that's a detailed response, and we acknowledge that. Next item is Adrian O'Driscoll again, 2021. Providing information requested by the committee in relation to the number of people who are not covered by free legal aid in cases before the Circuit Court, High Court and Supreme Court. And he actually says in the letter that it says in this particular letter that 72,674 certificates were granted in terms of free legal aid in 2018. So I was curious about how many cases are there where that wasn't the case, and I'm shocked at the next sentence. He says, the court service advises that it does not have statistics in relation to the number of persons appearing before the courts who are not legally aided. So that means they don't seem to have the total number appearing before the courts, because if they had the total number and they knew the number who got free legal aid, The in-between figure is those whose cases didn't get free legal aid, and if they can't provide that figure, they mustn't have the total figure. And the letter says it further advises that the position is that the majority of indictable offences dealt with which summarily or indictment in the circuit and district courts are covered by legal aid. However, most civil cases dealt with are not legally aided. So I think we need to write back and ask them for the total number of cases processed through the courts, the different courts, district, circuit, high court, etc. I would have thought that was a basic figure. Maybe they have it or not, but I think we just need to have an indication of the scale. And, so we'll write back on that basis. So we note and publish that. The next item then was from 2023 from Paul O'Toole, the Higher Education Authority, dated 28, providing information requested for our next periodic report in relation to the independent review, the Tarn review in Limerick, and he said the 9 of the 10 recommendations from the Tarn report have been implemented. The remaining recommendation is in progress. In relation to the Attorney General's advice of the review of spin-out companies, and we got a letter on that at the previous meeting, and we're aware of that. And then finally, the item in relation to Cork Institute of Technology, in relation to a number of certain named companies. A draft report of the review has been prepared by our friends Mazars again, and the HEA is reviewing this draft and will revert to the committee at the earliest opportunity. So we can incorporate that into the next periodic report. So we note and publish that. Next item 2024 from Brenda McDonough, Chief Executive of NAMA, providing an update requested in relation to the Player Wills and Poolbeg site. We note and publish this. Essentially, we had considered this at the meeting there, I think before Christmas, and we asked for an update of both sites. And he makes it very clear that in relation to the Player Will site, that the loans attaching to the site were fully repaid at par value by the borrower in late December. So NAMA has nothing whatever to do with that site any further. Good news that the taxpayer got all its money back at par value. I know a lot of people had hoped that site was going to be developed for housing or other purposes. That's not now. Well, it's up to the private owner to develop the site as he may be, but it's out of NAMA entirely. And the other issue in relation to the Poolbeg site, essentially, we had mentioned the delays, and he's saying it's as a matter of public knowledge that the Poolbeg West planning scheme is currently awaiting approval from An Bord Pleanála. NAMA would welcome An Bord Pleanála's planning decision on the Poolbeg West planning scheme in early course, as without that no proposed work on the site can commence. And he hopes the committee can be of assistance in the matter. But the point is, the delays associated with that are not the fault of NAMA, so we won't be including any of that in our periodic report. Next item then, we note and publish that. Next item is from Morris Buckley in relation to the OPW and the premises in Galway that was mentioned when they looked at the Mezzian Plaza for the Department of Health in Baggot Street in relation to the measurements arrangement. And he says that, that he makes it clear the annual rent being paid reflects the final agreement reached between OPW and the landlord, and therefore the OPW is satisfied that an overpayment of rent has not occurred. So we just take that as written to us. So we note and publish that, and it's relevant to our periodic report. There was an issue, but they're saying they're satisfied. I think that's as far as we can go. We can't tease that out.
Of course they're satisfied. They made the mistake.
No, the OPW.
The OPW made the mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, we had them here, and if you look at the transcript of that day,
it was 2006.
The Chief Commissioner was telling us, well, this is a very complex, calculation, and I outlined on the day why it actually wasn't a complex calculation, and that they had agreed a price divided by the old mechanism for measuring, and then multiplied the square foot bit by the new mechanism, and came up with a higher price. And I asked, was there any disciplinary process underway? Who was fault? The Chief Commissioner said, well, I suppose some of the responsibility with me. Is there a disciplinary process afoot? No, it's not a matter for disciplinary. And, that's the theme of everything in here. There's never disciplinary. There's never a tangible outcome. Therefore, repetition is not deterred and quite likely. So, I think OPW generally is something that we had possibly need to return to. I wasn't happy with the answers in that. I'm not happy with that as an answer. They're just telling us, saying, leave it to us, PSC, everything is tickety-boo. When, you know, at the meeting it wasn't. There's nothing in that letter to say why it now is. I mean, maybe I'm reading it wrong.
No, you're reading it, and look, the answer is vague, and it says they're satisfied no overpayment of rent was occurred, but they probably agreed.
Leave it to us is what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I mean, we seem to, at the meeting, secure the information that there was a higher rent. In fact, one of the excuses being given was, well, actually, we're talking to the owner of the building now. We're trying to retro-negotiate to cover our own mistake and get a return. So, you know, we don't have any kind of detail on that other than, you know, we're happy, so therefore
I think he's saying
you should be. You know?
It didn't come. The talking to the landlord didn't happen recently, or as a result of us raising the issue. He's saying
no, they told us at that meeting that they were doing that.
Yeah, well, he said it was agreed by what was the former commissioner, so that's a while back. The only point I would say, and your point is right, but because it's a 13-year-old lease, you know, it doesn't change.
So you're talking about a Galway lease?
Yeah, I'm talking about Galway.
I'm talking about Museum Plaza.
Oh, sorry. We're coming to Museum Plaza.
You mentioned Museum Plaza.
Sorry, Deputy. I said, when we were talking about Museum Plaza, we asked him, did this issue arise anywhere else? And it was highlighted in the CNAG's report that it happened in relation to a site in Galway 13 years ago.
And it came up in the context of the draft periodic report where I asked for an update, and that's the update.
Galway site.
Yeah, and I agree with what the Deputy is saying in the sense that that's what they're telling us. Yeah. So that's where we're at, that's what they're telling us.
But in terms of the periodic report, we come in strong on the Museum Plaza because it's more current. Okay, right. Okay, the next one then is, we note and publish that. Next one is Robert Watts, Secretary General of the Department of Public Expenditure, informed dated 28th of February, providing information requested by the Committee in relation to the cost of public tribunals. To the end of December 2018, the cost of inquiries was 457.6 million. No, that was the cumulative figure.
Of the ones that came under that. Sorry,
no, that was the cumulative. That was public tribunals: Moriarty, Smiddick, Lindsay, Finlay, Mahan. Mahan was planning. No, I think that's an overall government.
What's the total figure again? Sorry.
He says, I give the figures for the tribunals of inquiry is 341 million. For the commissions of investigation is 28 million. For the commissions to inquire is 82 million. For reports it was 5 million. Cost of public tribunals for 2018 is 8 million, and the commissions of investigation was 4.3 million, and the commissions to inquire was 688,000. So we estimate the total figure cumulative to date at 457 million, and some are not completed. It's a useful reference point to have for this committee to have for future reference, you know.
It's a useless reference point. It's useful for in terms of questions not being answered.
Yeah. That's the price.
And the current context in relation to this committee and other committees, but that is the price of not answering questions.
Correct. That is the price.
One of the prices.
Yeah. So we note and publish that. Then the third category of correspondence is from various individuals and other correspondence. So item 2020, 2027, 2028 are from a consultant rheumatologist and physician dated the 27th of February and the 2nd of March in relation to the selection of the site for the National Children's Hospital. Attached is a copy of the email sent to Deputy Micheál Martin. He wrote to Micheál Martin and copied it to us. Look, we just noted, you know, he thinks the hospital should be somewhere else. It's a fair point, but we're not. Yeah, we can raise that. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah. So correspondence 2022 from an individual dated 19th of February who queried the employment staff from outside the country by the housing agency. We noted, you know, it's hard to know the point he's making. We note that 2026 is from Orla McBreen, Director of Development, Education Unit, Department of Foreign Affairs, dated 1st of March, providing information in relation to the election observer roster that was to be sent to the Joint Committee on Foreign Affairs, Trade and Defence. We will note and publish this item, and I propose that we forward the item to the individual who raised these matters with the committee. However, we agreed previously that the matter was closed and are forwarding the item for information purposes only. That's agreed? Agreed. Next item 2029 from David Flynn, Registrar of the Dental Council, providing information requested by the committee in relation to the new public service single pension scheme. We note and publish this, and we thought this in the context of our periodic report, and we'll come to that about one of the organisations that there wasn't clarity last week. So we have that, and if there's a sentence to go into our periodic report, we'll do that now shortly in private session. And finally, correspondence 2039. We've only received as dated 6th of March. I have a copy on the screen. It's an update requested by the Public Accounts in relation to Mesian Plaza and the basis for measurement to determine the rent. Mr McCarthy stated, at the time of finalisation of the report, the Office of Public Works stated that it had engaged with the landlord with a view to rectifying the matter, and his response is below. The matter is still under consideration by the OPW, and discussions with the landlord have not yet concluded. So that's from Maurice Buckley, Chairperson of OPW. So we'll note and publish that and incorporate it as necessary into our periodic report. The next item then is statements and accounts since the last meeting. I think there's only two. Are they there on the screen? Yeah, they're both clear audit. One is the Qualifications and Authority Assurance Authority. Qualification and Quality Assurance Authority for 2017 is a clear audit opinion, and the Private Security Authority also a clear audit opinion, so we note those. So then the last item is the work programme now. It's probably a bit of a surprise to some people, but the Dáil is not sitting next Thursday, so we won't be meeting next Thursday, and obviously the following week the Dáil is not sitting at all, so we're back on the 28th dealing with we're back on the 28th, and we'll come to the work programme when we come back. We're back dealing with the broadband issue in the Department of Communications, Climate and Environment in respect of their appropriation accounts. And then the following week we have justice and equality. I think there's quite a bit in that. And we'll come to other items. The Paediatric Hospital Board are in the following week, and the Garda Síochána have confirmed. So there's a few items. We'll come back to the work programme the next day just to finalise it, okay? But that's the next couple that we had already pre-arranged, and some of them just had to move because of the week. So what I would say, we've now concluded the public part of our meeting for today. Our next public meeting will be on the 28th of March, when we will be meeting with officials from the Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment as we resume our consideration of the appropriation accounts 2017, which will also include an update on the National Broadband Plan. So we will now go into private session.